Chapter 553. Li Yundong shouted and immediately rushed out like lightning. But as soon as he rushed out, he saw Lu Xia rubbing her ankle outside and sitting on the ground with a painful look on her face. Behind her, there was also a young boy lying on the ground. He bared his teeth and shouted, "Get up, you're crushing me! Get up!" The girl next to the boy wanted to help her partner up, but when she saw Li Yundong rushing out with an aggressive look, she was immediately shocked and took a step back like a frightened deer. Go to the internet. When Lu Xia saw Li Yundong, she immediately squeezed out an embarrassed smile and waved at him. Hi. We meet again. Li Yundong was stunned. Why are you here? Lu Xia was embarrassed to say that she had fallen down when she got up in order to peep at the situation inside the copper hall. Fortunately, there was a follower behind her. Otherwise, she would have fallen miserably. Her eyes darted around for a moment, but fortunately, she was wearing sunglasses, so people couldn't see her panicked expression for a moment. She quickly lied, pulled the boy next to her, and said, "I'm his tour guide. I brought him here, and I happened to meet you again." Li Yundong took a look and saw that this boy was the guy who had just mocked him. He couldn't help frowning slightly and asking, "Him? Are you his tour guide?" Lu Xia secretly reached out and pinched the boy's arm. The boy was also smart. For the time being, he put aside his previous grudges with Lu Xia and quickly said, Yes, she's the tour guide I invited. What, can't I do it?" Although Li Yundong didn't see Lu Xia's movements, he saw the change in the boy's expression. He said with a faint smile, "It's really better to get rid of your enmity than to keep it alive." Seeing that Li Yundong didn't pursue the matter any further, Lu Xia quickly rubbed her ankle and stood up. She smiled stiffly and said, "That's right. No matter who I want to go against, I can't go against money." The boy also got up and said with a look of looking for trouble, "What? Are you not convinced? Only you can come here. I can't come here?" Li Yunyang glanced at him and didn't argue with him. He turned his head and said to Master Erdini, who had walked out of the copper hall, "Master, what do you think?" Master Erdini glanced at the two of them with a smile on his face. Before he could say anything, Lu Xia's face was full of excitement. She asked tentatively, "Excuse me, are you Master Erdini?" He looked at Lu Xia with a smile, nodded slightly, and said, "I am." Lu Xia suddenly shouted excitedly, "Wow, I saw the living Buddha. Oh my God." After that, she asked nervously then, "Master Erdini, can I take a picture with you?" Erdini chuckled and put his palms together. "Since we are fated to meet, why not?" Lu Xia had never expected that Master Erdini, who had an incredibly high status in the eyes of the Tibetan people, would be so kind and approachable. She immediately took out her mobile phone happily and shamelessly approached Master Erdini. She put on a non-mainstream pose and held her mobile phone high in front of her in an extremely skilled selfie pose, wanting to take a picture of herself. Li Yunyang didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He couldn't help saying, "Hey, at least be a little more professional, okay? It's fine if you don't have a DSLR, but at least you can get a camera. It's fine if you're a fool. Why did you get a mobile phone? It's fine if you have a mobile phone, but what's the matter with this non-mainstream pose? It's fine if you have a non-mainstream pose, but what's the matter with this selfie? You should at least ask someone to take a serious group photo for you. Can you figure out who you want to take a photo with?" Lu Xia let out a cry and looked at Master Erdini shyly. "Master, I'm really sorry. I only have this equipment." As she said this, she glared at Li Yunyang angrily. "I'm not here to travel. Why did I bring a camera with me?" Only then did the boy beside her wake up as if he had just woken up from a dream. He subconsciously murmured, "Is this the living Buddha? No, it doesn't look like it. I don't see him having anything more than us." Master Erdini laughed and said, that's right. The living Buddha doesn't have one more head or a few more arms than you. He's just an ordinary person like you." Li Yunyang also said with a smile, "Buddha said that the Buddha is an experienced person, and people are future Buddhas. That's all." Master Erdini looked at Li Yunyang with appreciation, put his palms together, and said to him, "Amitba, good." Li Yunyang also smiled and returned the salute. The boy beside him was stunned. He said, "Have I returned to ancient times? Can you not speak in such a genteel manner? It's so strange." Seeing that he was speaking rudely, Lu Xia couldn't help but glare at him, kick him and say, "Hey, hurry up and get your camera. Help me take a picture." Only then did the boy come to his senses. He hurriedly called his female companion, who had been stunned for a long time, and asked her to take out a camera from her bag. Then he shamelessly approached Master Erdini and shouted to his girlfriend, "Hey, help us take a few photos. Remember to take more." Only then did the girl wake up as if she had just woken up from a dream. She took out her camera and prepared to take pictures of the three of them. At this time, Master Erdini turned his head and said to Li Yunyang, "Tianzuan, don't you want to take a picture with us?" Before Li Yunyang could speak, he heard the boy mutter in a low voice, "What's there to take a picture with him?" Master Erdini's face immediately darkened. He took a step back and said in a deep voice, "How dare you? How dare you speak to Tianzuan like this? Do you know who he is?" Li Yunyang didn't want others to know his true identity, so he said with a smile, "I don't need to take a picture. Master, you can take it yourself." Seeing that the boy had said something wrong again, Lu Xia glared at him angrily and quickly smiled to smooth things over. She said, "Master, the child is not sensible and doesn't know how to speak. Don't be angry." Master Erdini said with a sullen face, "If he doesn't respect Tianzuan, then I won't take a picture with him." The boy's face suddenly turned red and he stood there speechlessly. Seeing that the atmosphere was stiff and awkward for a moment, Lu Xia quickly winked at the girl and said, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and take a picture." The girl came to her senses. Regardless of whether Erdini agreed or not, she immediately picked up the camera and took a picture. With a click, Lu Xia, Erdini, who had a stiff face, and her embarrassed and angry male companion were all in the picture. Li Yundong's profile was also in the picture. After Lu Xia finished taking the picture, she cheered and pulled the boy who was still standing foolishly next to her out. As she ran, she turned back and said to Li Yunyang, "Hey, let's have a meal together next time. I still have something to do. I'll leave first." Li Yunyang watched her run away like a fugitive. He secretly laughed and shook his head. Master Erdini couldn't help but sigh and say, "Tianzuan, I didn't expect you to have such a good cultivation at such a young age. It's rare that you don't get angry like this." Li Yunyang laughed and said, "In fact, Master, you don't have to care about them. There are many such people in the world. If you care about them all, won't you be tired to death all day long?" However, Master Erdini shook his head and said, "I'm not fussing about it. I'm just lamenting that although the Han people in the Central Plains are full of hidden talents and heroes, they lack faith and don't know how to be respectful. This will cause a big problem. Just now, I saw that he was a predestined person, so I agreed to take a photo with him. But I didn't expect him to be so ignorant. It's really despicable and stupid. It makes me sigh." Li Yunyang didn't want to discuss this topic with him, so he changed the topic and said, "By the way, Master, you just said that the Mahamudra is divided into 9 levels. May I ask what the 9 levels are? Can you teach me in detail?" Master Erdini didn't continue to pursue this issue. He smiled and said, "Of course, but let's go back to the hall and talk about it." As he said this, he took Li Yunyang back to the copper hall. Master Erdini pointed to a row of Amitabha statues and said, "Tianzuan, please take a look. These are the 9 kinds of Mahamudra of the reincarnation 9 prince. Look carefully." At a glance, Li Yunyang saw that from left to right, the 3 Amitabha statues had their hands stacked together, placed on their thighs, stretched out 3 fingers, and placed their right hands under their left hands. The next 3 had their hands on their chests, and their palms were side by side. The last 3 had their palms facing outward, with their right hands up and their left hands down. Master Erdini explained, "These 3 handprints are the upper print, also known as the Amitabha seal. The middle 3 are the middle print, also known as the Dharma seal. The last 3 are the lower print, also known as the fearless seal." Li Yundong nodded. He carefully looked at the Josuan Buddha statue, and found that there were some subtle differences in the handprints of the 3 upper prints. Among them, the upper print was for the thumb and index fingertips to bend and close, the middle print was for the thumb and middle fingertips to bend and close, and the lower print was for the thumb and ring fingertips to bend and close. Li Yundong asked curiously, "Are these 3 different ways of pinching?" Master Erdini nodded and said, "Yes, the handprints of these 3 Buddha statues are different. They are the upper print, the middle print, and the lower print." Li Yunyang looked at the other Buddha statues and said, "The other ones should be the upper middle level, the upper middle level, the lower middle level, the lower middle level, the lower middle level, and the lower level, right? Master Erdini smiled and said, "That's right." Li Yunyang memorized the way of kneading the 9 Mahamudra in his heart and asked, "What are the magical effects of these 9 Mahamudra Kung Fu?" Master Erdini smiled and said mysteriously, "Tianzuan, you can slowly understand it in the future. Let me keep it a secret." Li Yunyang smiled and didn't ask any more questions. But when he remembered the way of kneading the 9 Mahamudra and wanted to remember the corresponding mantras of these Mahamudra, he was surprised to find that there was no mantra under the 9 Mahamudra. Li Yunyang was stunned and asked curiously, "Hey, why don't these 9 Mahamudra have corresponding mantras?" Master Erdini laughed loudly and said, "Tianzuan, have you finally discovered it? Now do you know why Buddha can subdue demons by relying on this set of mantra incantations and extremely long Mahamudra Kung Fu?" Li Yunyang's heart skipped a beat, and he subconsciously blurted out, "Is it possible that this is a Mahamudra that doesn't need to be spoken?" Master Erdini clapped his hands and said with a smile, "That's right." Li Yunyang was suddenly moved and said in surprise, "Is a Mahamudra that doesn't need to be recited also a mantra Mahamudra Kung Fu?" Master Erdini smiled and said, "It's because the mantra Mahamudra Kung Fu needs to be recited for too long that Buddha specially created the reincarnation 9 prints that don't need to be recited. Although the power of this reincarnation 9 prints is far less than that of other Mahamudra that need to be spoken, because its moves are simple and fast, and it doesn't need to be spoken, you can use the reincarnation 9 prints to face the enemy when you speak the mantra. When you finish reciting the mantra, you can pinch the corresponding mantra Mahamudra. In this way, the other mantra Mahamudra Kung Fu will be perfectly connected." Li Yundong couldn't help but be tongue-tied. He was shocked and thought, "The incomplete version of the mantra Mahamudra Kung Fu that I used to practice was already ridiculously powerful. Then how powerful will the complete version of the mantra Mahamudra be? In addition to the reincarnation 9 prints that are almost instantaneous, how abnormal will this set of mantra Mahamudra be? I still worked overtime to get it out. Hurry up and go to sleep." Chapter 554. Only then did Li Yundong know that the 9 seals of reincarnation were the essence of the mantra Mahamudra. He asked Erdini in confusion, "Master, aren't you afraid that someone will steal the 9 seals of reincarnation?" Erdini laughed and said, "Tianzuan, you worry too much. Go to the internet." 7K. Oath M. The 9 seals of reincarnation are not something that ordinary people can make. Only the true gods with great power and great virtue can make the 9 seals of reincarnation. Even the guardian Vajra of our esoteric sect can't do it. Only then did Li Yundong understand. He didn't ask any more questions. He turned his head and silently looked at the many gods and Buddhas in the copper hall. As the saying goes, when a layman looks at the scenery is the scenery, while when a master looks at the scenery, he can see the whole world and even the universe from a flower or a leaf. Li Yundong was like this at this time. After looking at the Vajra Buddhas who were making Mahamudra, he even looked at the other gods and Buddhas who were holding magical weapons and had different postures. He faintly felt that their postures seemed to have a deep meaning. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat and he couldn't help imitating them. Erdini saw Li Yundong walking around one statue after another in the copper hall. From time to time, he would raise his hands and dance. He knew that Li Yundong had entered a state of cultivation and enlightenment. At this time, Li Yundong had a kind of subconscious enlightenment behavior of cultivators. He smiled slightly and didn't go forward to disturb Li Yundong again. Then he silently left. The Copper Hall was one of the tourist attractions opened by the Potala Palace in Lhasa. After Erdini left, many tourists passed by the Copper Hall and entered to watch. But then they saw a man in the hall dancing in front of the statues as if he was crazy, imitating the movements of these statues. He even imitated the ferocious or kind expressions of these gods and Buddhas vividly. These tourists were all shocked by Li Yundong's strange behavior. Some of them didn't dare to stay in the Copper Hall any longer and ran out one after another. Some of them were bold enough to take out their cameras or mobile phones to take pictures of Li Yundong from a distance. However, these tourists changed wave after wave. Until the sun went down, Li Yundong was still immersed in this kind of enlightenment, unable to extricate himself. It was not until late at night that a few lamas came to the Hall of Sound. They specially lit the wall lamps in the Hall of Sound for Li Yundong, so that he could still observe the mysteries of each god and Buddha without any obstacles. Li Yundong was completely unaware of everything around him. At this time, He had already entered a state of selflessness and was completely immersed in the mystery of the divine power of Buddhism. In this series of enlightenment, Li Yundong clearly felt that the postures of each god and Buddha statue had special power and majesty. For example, the postures of Wisdom King and Vajra were mainly majestic, frightening, destructive, and victorious. Their main functions were to wake up all living beings, deter enemies, eliminate fear, and exorcise ghosts and demons. The postures of the other gods and Buddhas were much gentler. Among them, the posture of the pharmacist Buddha was combined with the pharmacist Buddha's Mahamudra Kung Fu, and Li Yundong could feel a vigorous power surrounding him. This power seemed to represent the power of sunlight and moonlight, which could pull out the diseases of life and death, restore the physical and mental health of the sick, and calm the minds of the healthy. After an unknown period of time, Li Yundong went from one posture to another. After he had seen all the postures of the hundreds of gods and imitated them, he found a random place in the hall and sat down cross-legged. He entered his spirit world and silently recalled the Mahamudra Kung Fu he had learned and the postures of Buddhism he had comprehended. This meditation lasted for a day and a night. When Li Yundong woke up the next day, it was already the third day. Li Yundong, who was sitting cross-legged, opened his eyes at this time and let out a long breath. Suddenly, he raised his head and let out a long roar. Unlike the long roar he had raised his head in the past, Li Yundong's long roar contained the power of Buddhist mantra. It was as if countless eminent monks were chanting scriptures in unison, and it was as if countless Buddhist bells were echoing in unison. For a moment, the bronze statues in the entire Hall of Sound were shaken by Li Yundong's voice, making buzzing sounds. Then, as Li Yundong's voice spread out of the Hall of Sound, the other statues in the other palaces, such as the Solitary Perfection Hall, the East and West Sunlight Halls, and the Maitreya Hall, also began to buzz. In an instant, all the statues in the entire Padala Palace were shaken by Li Yundong's long roar, making buzzing sounds. It was as if all the gods and Buddhas and the immovable Heavenly Lord, the King of all the Wisdom Kings, were shouting the name of Buddha. It was majestic and earth-shattering, as if waves were echoing with huge waves. One wave after another, forming a huge wave that covered the sky and rushed straight into the sky. At this time, the pilgrims who were marching to Padala Palace and the tourists who were playing in it were stunned by the strange scene in front of them. For a moment, the pilgrims all prostrated themselves on the ground in awe, thinking that it was the manifestation of the gods and Buddhas. The tourists looked around, as if they wanted to find the direction and source of the sound. After Li Yundong let out a long roar, he stood up. Although he had been cultivating for 2 days, he still felt energetic. When he opened his eyes, he saw Erdini standing at the door of the hall, looking at him with a smile without saying anything. Li Yundong walked over with a smile and said, "I've made you wait for a long time. How long have I been in meditation?" Erdini put his palms together and chanted the name of Buddha. "Amitabha, it's not long. It's only been 2 days." Li Yundong was slightly surprised. 2 days? Why do I feel like it's only been 2 hours? Erdini laughed and said, 200 years is just a snap of the fingers, let alone 2 days? It's not surprising that you feel this way, Tianzuan. Li Yundong also laughed and returned the salute. "Master, you're right. However, although 2 days is short, for some people, it seems as long as centuries. Although I don't care, I can't ignore her feelings." As he said this, Li Yundong hesitated for a moment and finally said, "Master Erdini, I have a presumptuous request. I don't know if I can tell you." Erdini looked at Li Yundong with eyes that seemed to be able to see through everything. He said with a smile, "Tianzuan, you don't need to say it. I've already answered you with words." Li Yundong was stunned and asked curiously, "What words?" As soon as he finished speaking, his heart skipped a beat and he asked tentatively, "Do you mean to advise me not to go up the mountain from the east?" Erdini laughed and said, "What else could it be?" Li Yundong was shocked. "Master, do you know that I'm going to the holy mountain to get the 1,000-year-old snow lotus?" Erdini smiled slightly, still pointing to the sky with his finger, and said with a smile, "The 1,000-year-old snow lotus gathers the spiritual chi of heaven and earth, and it is also the treasure of our esoteric sect. Of course I know its fate." Li Yundong asked in confusion, "But master, don't you want to ask me what I'm going to do with this 1,000-year-old snow lotus? Are you going to give it to me for nothing?" Erdini laughed and said, "Even Buddha can feed the eagle with his body, not to mention that you are the reincarnation of Wisdom King. Besides, Everything in the world has its own destiny. What can I do to stop it? If it is destined to be yours, no matter how hard I try to stop it, it's useless. Li Yundong sighed with emotion, bowed to Erdini respectfully and said, Master, you really have the feelings of Buddha. You deserve to be a living Buddha in the world. I admire you. But what do you mean by advising me not to go up the mountain from the east? After a long silence, Erdini said to Li Yundong meaningfully, Tianzuan, in fact, I already knew what you would choose and what your result would be. But the reason why I still say this to you is that I hope you won't take this step. Li Yundong was suddenly confused. He asked in confusion, Master, what do you mean by this? Do you know that I will definitely go up the mountain from the east? What if I go up the mountain from the east? What if I go up the mountain from another direction? Erdini smiled slightly. He lowered his head and recited the name of Buddha. The Buddha says, I can't say it, I can't say it. Li Yundong suddenly smiled bitterly and thought to himself, why are all the eminent monks who are proficient in the karmic path like this? Will you die if you don't keep me guessing? Erdini seemed to know what Li Yundong was thinking, so he said with a smile, it's not that I don't want to say it, but it's useless to say it. Instead, it will reveal the secrets of heaven and suffer the wrath of heaven. So please forgive me, Tianzuan. Li Yundong was slightly shocked, but he quickly reacted. Since Master Erdini knew the karmic path, he must also know his mind-reading ability. Of course, he knew what he was thinking. Li Yundong had no choice but to bow to Erdini with a wry smile and say, Master, I'll leave for the time being. I'll go get the 1,000-year-old snow lotus first. I'll come back to thank you in the future. Erdini returned the salute with a smile and said, there are 3 holy mountains in Tibet. Tianzuan, do you know which holy mountain the 1,000-year-old snow lotus grows on? Li Yundong asked respectfully, Master, please give me some advice. Erdini smiled and said, the 1,000-year-old snow lotus is a spiritual object of heaven and earth. It can hide itself and move itself. It doesn't grow on a certain holy mountain. Only when a fated person appears will it appear, so its real body may appear on any holy mountain. But what is certain is that it will appear on the holy mountain that is most fated with the fated person. Li Yundong thought for a moment and asked, then it must be Kari Holy Mountain? Erdini smiled and said, Tianzuan, you have to explore it yourself. Seeing that he was unwilling to tell him in detail, Li Yundong didn't force him. After saying goodbye to Erdini with a smile, he left the Copper Hall. As soon as he left the Copper Hall, Li Yundong saw many tourists talking and whispering about the abnormality of the statues just now. Li Yundong saw it, but he just smiled and didn't take it seriously. After leaving Patala Palace, he ran in the direction of Kari Holy Mountain. Along the way, Li Yundong flew at a low altitude when there was no one around. When he met someone, he landed and ran wildly. After a few hours, he arrived at the foot of Kari Holy Mountain. Li Yundong looked up and found that he was at the foot of the west side of Kari Holy Mountain. He saw the steepest and highest holy mountain in Tibet standing majestically, like a sharp sword piercing the sky. Li Yundong was amazed. He looked at the western hillside and couldn't help but think of what Erdini had said. He was full of doubts. Why can't I go up to the east? Is there something wrong with the east? Thinking of this, Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. As the saying goes, curiosity killed the cat. Why didn't he listen to the living Buddha's advice and not go up the mountain from the east? Then he would go up the mountain from another direction. Thinking of this, Li Yundong was about to climb up from the west side of the mountain when he suddenly heard a shout and a stern shout coming from the faint wind. Li Yundong was stunned and subconsciously turned his head in the direction of the sound. He saw that the sound was coming from the east side of Kari Holy Mountain. Li Yundong was surprised. He hesitated for a moment and thought to himself, what the hell is going on? If there's nothing else, I can just turn back and go up the mountain from another place. Thinking of this, Li Yundong quickly walked to the east side of Kari Holy Mountain. As soon as he turned to the east side, he heard the clear sound of fighting and shouting coming from the mountainside with the help of the wind. Li Yundong looked up and saw several figures entangled on the snow-covered hillside. 2 men in grey Taoist robes were attacking 4 llamas fiercely, and the 4 llamas were standing in 4 corners, surrounding a woman in the middle. Li Yundong used his strong eyesight to take a look and saw that the woman was wearing a white dress, a red robe, and red boots. It was Mei Duo, who was dressed like Bonda Lam. Today when I opened Xueqi, I saw that a book friend left me a message telling me that his sister was going to give birth and wanted me to give the child a name. The child's surname was also Li, and I also wanted to send my blessings. Haha, it's better to give the child's parents a name. I won't do it for them. I can send my blessings. I wish the baby good health and happiness. Chapter 555. When he saw Mei Duo on the eastern slope of Kari Holy Mountain, he was stunned for a moment. He couldn't help but ask in his heart, why is Mei Duo here? But at this time, the two Taoists on the hillside were besieging Mei Duo very fiercely. He didn't have time to think about this problem for a while. He immediately rushed up the hillside like lightning. Watch net. 7K. Oath M. Li Yundong exerted his strength and with just a few leaps, he quickly arrived at the mountainside. When he looked closely, he saw that one of the two Taoists was tall and thin, with a mustache under his nose, wolf eyes and eagle nose. His face was sinister, and there was a ferocious aura between his eyebrows. The other Taoist was short and fat, with rat eyes and deer nose. He looked wretched and ridiculous, but the light shining from his narrow eyes was like that of a jackal, sinister and vicious. Of these two Taoists, the tall and thin one was holding a horsetail whisk and a long black sword, while the short and fat one had his hands hidden in his sleeves, making it impossible to see what kind of magical weapon he was using. The black long sword in the lanky Taoist's hand was superb. Sometimes it appeared in his hand, and sometimes it turned into a powerful magical weapon. It suddenly appeared behind Mei Duo and the others out of thin air. It stabbed fiercely, making it impossible for them to guard against it. The horsetail whisk in his hand was even more powerful. With a wave of his hand, there seemed to be countless strong winds blowing through the air. Each of them was like a sharp flying knife. Those who were hit would either die or be injured. As for the stout Taoist, he kept wandering around Mei Duo and the others, as if he was guarding against them from escaping. As he walked, he sneered in a sharp voice, "Hurry up and hand over the 1,000-year-old snow lotus, or I'll kill you." At this time, Mei Duo was surrounded by 4 guardians. There were several llamas lying in the snow around her. The white snow under their bodies was dyed red with blood. Obviously, they were already dead. One of the remaining 4 guardians was Dorji Tenzin. When Li Yunyang saw this scene, he was even more shocked. He knew that Dorji Tenzin had been enlightened by the great mandala of the living Buddha's fetus realm, and his power had been greatly increased. At least, he was equivalent to a master in the Yin spirit phase. However, he hadn't expected that so many guardian deities would be beaten by these two Taoists without being able to fight back. Moreover, only one of them had attacked fiercely, while the other one was wandering around to watch the battle. Li Yunyang was shocked. Seeing that Dorji Tenzin and the others could not hold on any longer, he immediately stepped forward and rushed over like lightning. He quickly pinched a Mahamudra in his hand, which was still the Mahamudra he was most familiar with before, immovable fundamental mudra. He let out a loud roar, and a huge golden palm print slammed towards the tall and skinny Taoist. The tall and skinny Taoist only felt a gust of strong wind blowing against his face, as if a high-speed train was crashing towards him, causing his hair to stand on end. He was shocked and immediately retreated more than 10 meters away. The pudgy Taoist appeared beside him almost at the same time. The two of them were so fast that they seemed to have moved in an instant, which shocked Li Yundong. As the saying goes, when an expert makes a move, you will know whether he is real or not. Li Yundong knew that what he had done just now was almost a sneak attack. This Mahamudra was fast, fierce, hidden, and sudden, but the other party had still easily dodged it. Obviously, his cultivation was extremely high. Li Yundong's Mahamudra missed and hit the mountain with a bang, causing the snow on the hillside to fall down, and the snowy peak on the mountain to shake slightly. When Mei Duo and Dorji Tenzin saw Li Yundong, they were both delighted and exclaimed, "Brother Han!" "Zhanren Li!" Li Yundong nodded slightly to them, then turned his face and looked at the two gray-robed Taoists with unfriendly eyes. He said coldly, "Who are you? Why are you besieging them?" The tall and skinny Taoist and the pudgy Taoist also looked at Li Yundong with bright eyes. The tall and skinny Taoist snorted coldly and did not speak, while the pudgy Taoist screamed, "Who are you? Are you also from the esoteric sect? Why are you dressed like this?" Li Yundong didn't answer but asked, "It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is, why are you besieging my friends?" Your friends? The pudgy Taoist glanced at Meiduo and Dorji Tenzin behind him with his thin eyes. He laughed shrilly and said, My shitty and I were looking for the 1,000-year-old snow lotus here. Unexpectedly, these people appeared and stopped me from looking for it. They said that it belonged to their esoteric sect. Everything in the world has no owner. Why should they say that it belongs to their esoteric sect? Ridiculous. How ridiculous. What's more, it's not up to them to agree to what I want. As he said this, the pudgy Taoist laughed wildly and said, If you know what's good for you, ask your friends to hand over the 1,000-year-old snow lotus quickly. Maybe I'll let you live if I'm in a good mood. Otherwise, humph. The pudgy Taoist snorted heavily, causing the air around to tremble. The thick snow on the hillside seemed to jump up. Li Yundong was shocked again. He saw that although this Taoist was arrogant, his cultivation was not a joke. He was definitely not inferior to him. It was fine if it was one of them, but if two of them attacked together, how could he have a chance of winning? Li Yundong's face was as cold as water, and he quickly thought of a countermeasure. At this time, the tall and thin Taoist on the opposite side suddenly lowered his head and said something to his Shixiang. The pudgy Taoist was stunned for a moment. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Yundong seriously, saying, Hey boy, did you split open a glass sky emperor's clock before? Li Yundong was stunned. Yes, Yub. The pudgy Taoist laughed and said, It turns out that you let us out. I was wondering why you looked a little familiar. The pudgy Taoist put his hands on his hips and laughed. Hey boy, do you know who we are? Hearing his frivolous and arrogant words, Li Yundong was unhappy, but he didn't say anything. He just frowned slightly and said, May I know who you are? The pudgy Taoist pointed to himself and said, My name is Su Lingzi. He then pointed to his shitty and said, My shitty is called Su Kongzi. You can also call us Su Ling and Su Kong. Humph, in the early years of the People's Republic, we were also famous. Haven't you heard of them? Li Yundong said in a deep voice, No. Su Ling suddenly jumped up and said angrily, What? You haven't heard of us. How dare you? I'm going to. Before he could finish his words, Su Kong, who was beside him, bent down and whispered a few words in his ear. Su Ling immediately suppressed his anger, snorted and said, Forget it. For the sake of the fact that you happened to save the two of us, I'll let you off this time. You're lucky to have escaped this calamity. Hey boy, I'll give you a great opportunity. Do you want it? Li Yundong asked calmly. What kind of opportunity? Su Ling pointed to his feet and said, I see that you have a good aptitude, and your cultivation is barely acceptable. Although you are a disciple with skills, I won't argue with you for the sake of the fact that you once saved our lives. If you kneel down and kowtow 3 times, I will take you as my disciple and pass on all my skills to you. What do you think? Before Li Yundong could say anything, Dorji Tenzin and Meiduo, who were behind him, were shocked. The other 3 mountain-protecting monks looked at Li Yundong with unfriendly eyes, eager to attack him. Meiduo said loudly in Tibetan, Don't do it. Brother Han won't hurt us. He's definitely not with these 2 Taoists. Dorji Tenzin immediately shouted at them in Chinese, Stop. Zhenren Li is not such a person. Li Yundong looked back at them, smiled at Meiduo, and nodded, indicating for her to rest assured. After turning his face, he looked at Su Ling with a mocking look in his eyes and said, You want me to take you as my master? Su Ling put his hands on his hips and said proudly, Of course. Do you know how many people want to take me as their master, but I haven't agreed? Li Yundong smiled slightly and asked, Since you want me to take you as my master, you have to tell me which sect you are from, right? Su Ling snorted and said, Then listen carefully. I am the left protector of Zenkingism, and my shitty Su Kong is the right protector of Zenkingism. What do you think? I have a big background, don't I? Zenkingism? Li Yundong frowned slightly and asked, Emperor Liao founded Zenkingism in Huangshi Mountain in Jiangxi in the first year of Tongji in the Qing dynasty? Su Ling looked at Li Yundong in surprise. You know. Hey, kid, you're not being honest. Didn't you just say that you've never heard of our names? Li Yundong said with some sarcasm, I really don't know, but I know that Zenkingism is gradually declining. There are only some followers in Fujian, and they are almost extinct in other places. Su Ling froze on the spot, looking lost. Is that so? How many years have I been locked up? When our Zenkingism was at its peak, in the 15th year of the Republic of China, more than 10,000 people from all over the world gathered in Huangshi Mountain in Jiangxi. At that time, the world was really one family, and China was one person. How majestic it was! All the sects in the world respect our Zenkingism, and the Zhengyi school is below us. I didn't expect that now. Su Ling sighed for a while, then suddenly became spirited again. He looked at Li Yundong with bright eyes and said, "But it's okay now. With my cultivation and kung fu, as long as I make a call, our Zenkingism will definitely rise again. At that time, I will be the sect master, and my shitty will be the deputy sect master. I will make you the left protector, and I guarantee that you will be invincible in the world. What do you think?" Li Yundong finally couldn't help laughing. Hearing Li Yundong's ear-piercing laughter, Su Ling said unhappily, "Hey, what are you laughing at?" Li Yundong chuckled and said to Su Ling, "You're talking nonsense, but aren't you still sealed in the Emperor's clock? If I hadn't split open the Emperor's clock and let you out, you would still be locked up in it. You want me to take you as my master? What if you get locked up again? Since I have the ability to let you out, it means that my ability is greater than yours." As he said this, Li Yundong pointed to his feet and said, "Otherwise, if you kowtow to me 3 times, I will take you as my disciple and let you be my servant. I promise that you will not have to worry about food and clothing for the rest of your life, and you will not get sick. What do you think?" As Li Yundong spoke, he turned his head and pointed to the llama lying in a pool of blood behind him. "Of course, you have to ask them and see how they will settle the score with you. Then we can talk about taking you as our master. What do you think?" Su Ling was so angry that his whole body trembled, and his face turned purple-red. He gritted his teeth and said word by word, "I have good intentions, but you dare to make fun of me. You're courting death." As he spoke, the tall and thin Taoist Su Kong stared at Li Yundong like an eagle. He slowly walked to his side and formed a pincer attack with his Shixiang. Su Ling. Dorji Tenzin immediately shouted, "Zhenren Li, will help you." However, Li Yundong raised his arm, raised his palm to them, and said, "No need." Li Yundong stared at Su Ling with sharp eyes. The smile on his face gradually disappeared, replaced by a cold expression. He slowly said, "You surrounded my friends and tried to kill them. I think it's you who are courting death." As soon as he finished speaking, Su Ling and Su Kong roared angrily at the same time and rushed toward Li Yundong from 2 directions. Li Yundong snorted coldly. His 5 fingers flew and he quickly pinched the Mahamudra. He recited the mantra and threw out a palm. It was the real mantra Mahamudra that he had just learned in the Copper Hall. This was the second watch from yesterday. Today's 2 watch from yesterday was the same. Chapter 556. Li Yundong didn't panic in the face of a 2-pronged attack. He made a Vajra fist with both hands. The index finger of his left hand was straight, and the fingers of his right hand were wrapped around the first joint of his left index finger, while the tip of his left index finger was supported by the first joint of his right thumb. It was the wisdom fist print of the Mahamudra Mudra, which could destroy all the nameless darkness. Li Yundong held the Mahavirokana Mudra in his hand and recited the mantra. The wisdom fist of the Mahavirokana Mudra was the shortest move in the mantra. There were only 3 paragraphs of the mantra in total. Li Yundong recited it quickly and finished reciting it in the blink of an eye. Dark Sun Luo Tuadu. Bang! As soon as Li Yundong finished chanting, all the zhenqi in his body surged out like a volcano erupting. A majestic force instantly gathered in his hands. With a loud bang, the wisdom fist seal blasted toward Taoist Su Ling, who was rushing toward him like a cannonball. Watch net. 7K. Oath M. The power of this Mahamudra was far greater than the power of the Mahamudra that Li Yundong had chanted before. In the past, when Li Yundong made a Mahamudra, the Mahamudra would shine with golden light, as if it was a golden palm. But at first glance, one could still tell that the palm was illusory and transparent. But at this time, when Li Yundong made a move, all the zhenqi in his body seemed to be condensed in this move. At first glance, it looked like a real palm, and even the air and light could not penetrate it. Su Ling felt that the Mahamudra had arrived in front of him in the blink of an eye, as if a Vajra Buddha had suddenly appeared in front of him and slapped him. This powerful and domineering gust of wind caused all the hairs on his body to stand on end. He immediately let out a scream and disappeared from where he stood. Li Yundong's Mahamudra martial arts forced the aggressive Su Ling to retreat, but in the blink of an eye, Su Kong beside him rushed to Li Yundong's side. He swung the horsetail whisk in his hand, like a steel whip, toward his face. Dorji Tenzin, Mei Duo, and the others, who were not far away, heard the terrifying sound of breaking through the air. They felt their hair stand on end. They knew that if this hit, even ice would be smashed into pieces, let alone human flesh. They saw Li Yundong use the Mahamudra to drive Su Kong away, but he was attacked by Su Kong, so they immediately exclaimed. But Li Yundong didn't even look at them. A white light suddenly flew out of his back to protect his master, fiercely cutting toward the horsetail whisk. Su Kong frowned, immediately turned his wrist, and the fly whisk that he had thrown out came back. He turned his body, and the fly whisk in his hand was a soft object. The soft whisk avoided the fierce slash of the Liuhe sword, but with the momentum of the rotation, it climbed to the hilt of the Liuhe sword like a vine. Then Su Ling took advantage of the momentum of turning to turn over and slashed with his sword. The black long sword came out from his waist in an instant and went straight for Li Yundong's waist. Li of the attack of Yundong's attack of Su. Of Li of Yundong of Li of the long of sword and of Li of Yundong of Li of sword of Li Yu. But in an instant, Li Yundong stretched out his hand and quickly pinched a colorful brocade bag. In the blink of an eye, the fan of 7 treasures jumped out. Each leaf of the treasure fan clanged like a saw wheel, fiercely chopping toward the black sword in Su Kong's hand. Su Kong was stunned. He hadn't expected that Li Yundong would have a powerful magical weapon with him. Moreover, when the fan leaf of the fan of 7 treasures was spinning rapidly, a layer of golden Sanskrit appeared on the fan leaf, and the edge of the fan leaf was making a sharp sound. If his sword were to fight with it, it might be damaged. He didn't dare to fight with the powerful magical weapon in his hand against the fan of 7 treasures. He immediately turned his wrist, and the horsetail whisk in his hand immediately let go of the Luong sword. Like a group of poisonous snakes, it entangled the tail of the fan. In the blink of an eye, the horsetail whisk wrapped tightly around the tail of the fan of 7 treasures like a vine. The rapidly spinning fan leaf stopped spinning. Su Kong shouted, shook his wrist, and threw the horsetail whisk in his hand into the air, pulling the fan of 7 treasures into the air. When the 2 magic treasures flew into the air, they suddenly stopped and began to wrestle like 2 strong men. The fan of 7 treasures' psychic fans struggled frantically, wanting to break free from the horsetail whisk's entanglement. However, the horsetail whisk tightened its grip, desperately trying to bind the fan of 7 treasures' psychic fan tighter. Li Yundong saw that his powerful magical weapon was entangled with one of the opponent's powerful magical weapons. His heart skipped a beat, and he immediately commanded the Luong sword to attack the opponent fiercely. The fight between the 2 of them was as fast as thunder and as fierce as lightning. The moment Su Ling was driven away by the Mahamudra, the 2 of them had already fought several times. When Su Ling appeared again, he suddenly opened his eyes wide and said in surprise, "The fan of 7 treasures. Kid, your powerful magical weapon is not bad. What's your relationship with the Fox Zen school?" But before he had time to be surprised, he saw a sword that had been attacking the void suddenly split into 2 and attack him fiercely. Su Ling was shocked and said, "Luong sword? What's your relationship with the Linggong sect?" As he spoke, the Luong sword had already pounced on him like lightning. Su Ling saw it accurately and stretched out his finger to flick the sword hard. With a clang, the long sword was bounced far away by him. Su Ling saw that Li Yundong was silent with a sullen face. He looked at the Luong sword and the fan of 7 treasures, and his eyes suddenly showed strong greed. He laughed and said, "You won't tell me? It doesn't matter. When I snatch it, it will be my powerful magical weapon." As he said this, he suddenly stretched out his hands from his sleeves, holding a black jade tablet. Su Ling threw the jade tablet in his hand into the air, and it immediately stopped in mid-air. The Luong sword also stopped in front of him in an instant, unable to move even half a step forward. At a glance, Li Yundong recognized that it was clearly the imperial tablet that the ancient princes, dukes, and ministers held in their hands when they went to court. When this imperial tablet was erected in the air, it was as if there was an invisible god holding a jade tablet, frightening the Luong sword so much that it could no longer move. Li Yundong suddenly felt a chill in his heart. He frowned and thought to himself, "What kind of powerful magical weapon is this? How can it make the Luong sword unable to move after being thrown into the air?" Even I feel that my connection with the Luong sword has been cut off? Su Ling seemed to know what Li Yundong was thinking. He said proudly, "Humph, no matter how powerful your Luong sword is, it will still become a piece of trash when it meets my Yuhuang Xiandu. Humph, let me tell you, my Yuhuang Xiandu specializes in restraining all magical items in the world. No matter how powerful the magical weapon is, it will be unable to move when it meets my Yuhuang Xiandu." Only then did Li Yundong understand a little. He thought to himself, this Yuhuang Xian is probably a powerful magical weapon of the exchange type. It doesn't have much attack power, but it can offset a powerful magical weapon of the opponent with this magical weapon. If used properly, this powerful magical weapon is really a bit abnormal. If I have such a powerful magical weapon, I don't have to be afraid of the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade in Zhang Yuan's hands. Seeing that Li Yundong was silent, Su Ling laughed wildly and said, "Boy, there is a way to heaven, but you don't want to take it. There is no door to hell, but you insist on coming. I gave you a way to live, but you didn't cherish it. Humph, I want to see what other powerful magical weapons you have now." After saying that, he let out a shrill howl and took out a magic treasure from his sleeve. It was a jade seal. Su Ling held the jade seal in his hand and pressed it in front of him. Immediately, 2 black characters were clearly stamped in the air by him. They were the 2 characters of the ancient seal script, 5 ghosts. The 2 black characters hung in the air for a while, then slowly twisted and drifted away, as if the condensed thick ink had been dispersed by an inkstone. The black chi slowly dispersed into 5 human figures. These 5 people were dressed in 5 colored robes, each holding an object. One was holding a frame and a jar, one was holding a leather bag and a sword, one was holding a fan, one was holding a hammer, and one was holding a fire kettle. The 5 of them had blue faces and empty eyes, and their bodies exuded a black aura of death. Li Yundong only took a glance at them and suddenly turned pale with fright. He recognized that they were clearly the 5 ghosts of heaven and the 5 plagues of earth. They were the spring plague Zhang Yuanbua, the summer plague Lu Yuanda, the autumn plague Zhao Gongming, the winter plague Zhong Rengue, and the chief plague Shi Wenye. Usually, when one of the 5 ghosts appeared, there would be a terrible plague in the world. At this time, when the 5 ghosts appeared at the same time, the consequences would be unimaginable. Li Yundong was shocked and angry. "These are the 5 ghosts? How can you summon such a vicious ghost god?" Su Ling laughed loudly and said, "Vicious? Are you kidding me? These are the gods of heaven on the list of immortals. Don't you know that Emperor One of Sui once made them generals? Look, the one in the cyan robe is named General Xianxing, the one in the red robe is named General Xianying, the one in the white robe is named General Senwei, the one in the black robe is named General Zhenqing, and the one in the yellow robe is named General Zhenwei. You are just a child who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. When you see the 5 ghost generals, why don't you surrender?" After that, he flicked his sleeves, and the 5 ghosts immediately waved the powerful magical weapons in their hands. Among them, the one holding the hook hooked the mouth of the jar, and in an instant, a blue smoke was released. The one holding the leather bag and the long sword used the long sword in his hand to split the leather bag open, and red smoke suddenly came out of the leather bag. The plague ghost with the hammer in his hand smashed the ground hard. With a crack appeared on the ground, and wisps of black mist flew out of the crack. The plague ghost with the firepot in his hand took a deep breath of the firepot, and then spat out a mouthful of yellow smoke at Li Yundong. The 4 wisps of smoke surged in the air. At first, they were not fast, like 4 giant pythons of different colors winding and climbing in the air. But the plague ghost with the fan suddenly waved the fan in his hand hard. In an instant, on the mountainside of Kari Holy Mountain, a strong wind blew and whistled. In the blink of an eye, the 4 wisps of smoke turned into wild snakes dancing wildly, turning into a huge whirlpool and pouncing on Li Yundong from all directions. Li Yundong's heart trembled. He knew that these 4 auras represented the 4 most terrible death chi in the world, which were death chi, plague chi, ghost chi, and poison chi. As long as ordinary people touched a little bit of it, they would immediately turn into rotten water, and there would be no bones left. Even a master at the top phase of young spirit like him would rot and die if he breathed in a little bit, let alone touch it. Li Yundong knew that Su Ling was ruthless, but he hadn't expected that the Taoist in front of him would be so vicious. He had never heard of such a thing. He was furious and shouted, "Aren't you afraid of the heavenly tribulation by using such a heinous magic treasure?" Su Ling laughed and said, Take care of yourself first. After that, he pointed his finger at Li Yundong and laughed wildly. This is the result of going against me. Chapter 557. Seeing the plague qi rushing toward him from all directions, he immediately held his breath and entered the state of zhenqi from the mortal breath. At the same time, his yang spirit went out of his body in an instant and turned into the Wisdom King with 3 heads and 6 arms. At the same time, he pinched 3 Mahamudra in his hands and took out the burning thumb pot from his arms. With a flick of his fingers, there was a tinkling sound. Watch net. 7K. Oath M. The burning thumb pot was born to restrain the evil spirit of demons and ghosts. Although the 5 ghosts were gods, the plague they released was too evil and vicious, so it was also restrained by the burning thumb pot. With a flick of his finger, the burning thumb pot immediately spread out layers of halos. These halos spread out like ripples, immediately blocking the poisonous wind blowing from all directions around Li Yundong. Moreover, as soon as the halos came into contact with the 4-colored smoke, they immediately absorbed a part of the smoke and bounced back in an instant, as if they had absorbed a part of the evil qi. Su Ling was shocked and looked at Li Yunyang in disbelief. He exclaimed, "The burning thumb pot. How was this possible? How could a kid like you have such a magic tool? You actually have 3 magic treasures?" Magic treasures were the weapons of cultivators, but not every cultivator had a magic treasure. This was because every magic treasure had its own unique use. As long as it was used properly, it could have the power to change the situation of a battle. Such things were naturally hard to find. For ordinary cultivators, having a magic treasure was already a great thing. If one could have 2 magic treasures at the same time, it would be simply awe-inspiring and no one would dare to offend them. However, if a cultivator had 3 Dharma treasures at the same time, it was equivalent to more than doubling his combat strength. Any challenger would have to fight the cultivator and his 3 Dharma treasures at the same time. It was equivalent to fighting 1 against 4. After the surprise, Su Ling's eyes quickly revealed strong jealousy and greed. He grinned grimly and said, well, what other powerful magical weapons do you have? Take them all out. This is a good deal for me." After that, he wrapped up his sleeves and quickly disappeared. His sharp laughter could be heard everywhere in the strong wind. At this time, in the void where he was entangled with Alyoha, he suddenly threw the long sword in his hand into the air, letting his sword entangle with Alyoha. He also rolled up his sleeves and covered his figure completely. In an instant, he disappeared from where he was. Li Yunyang saw that there was a 4-colored poisonous wind around him. Although the burning thumb pot could block this evil qi, every time the burning thumb pot released a wave of light, it would absorb a part of the poisonous qi. This part of the poisonous qi was different from the yuan qi of demons and ghosts, so it could not be directly digested and absorbed by the burning thumb pot. As a result, the burning thumb pot had to spend a large amount of spiritual qi to compete with the evil qi that had invaded the inside of the magical item. Every time the burning thumb pot released a wave of halo, it would weaken a little, and the surrounding wind and evil qi would also become stronger and fiercer. Li Yunyang saw that the situation was not good, but he was not surprised at all. His face was as calm as water, and he closed his eyes. At the moment he closed his eyes, his young spirit suddenly opened his eyes, and the vertical pupil between his eyebrows also opened in an instant, emitting a dazzling brilliance. Li Yunyang controlled his young spirit Faz Hen, and his 6 arms pinched 3 Mahamudras in succession. 2 of his hands were tied inside, and his 2 index fingers were vertical. His wrists were 2 to 3 inches apart, and his 2 thumbs were bent and crossed 3 times. It was the Baisajayaguru Buddha's fundamental mudra, which could get rid of all diseases. Li Yunyang's other 2 hands were in the Vajra bind, and his 2 middle fingers were stretched out like needles, in the shape of a single cobalt. It was the Samayana Mahamudra of the Vajra realm, which could not be moved by the wind. As for his remaining 2 hands, he put his palms together modestly. The fingernails of the 2 ring fingers and the 2 middle fingers were joined into his palms, and the 2 index fingers were attached to the backs of the 2 middle fingers. He put his thumbs up, in the shape of 3 eyes. It was the light-gathering Buddha's Mahamudra that could destroy all obstacles and subdue all ghosts. These 3 Mahamudra were very targeted. They were aimed at the evil qi of the poisonous wind in all directions, the fierce attack from all directions, and the defense and counterattack of the summoned 5 ghosts. Li Yunyang's previous mantra Mahamudra was extremely powerful. At this time, with all the mantras, its power was simply terrifying. Although the crazy evil wind around him was fierce, Li Yundong's Mahamudra of the Baisajai Guru, together with the burning thumb pot, immediately forced the evil wind around him to stay away, as if there was a barrier around him out of thin air. Li Yundong blasted out the Samayana Mahamudra of the Vajra realm. Suddenly, the golden Mahamudra instantly turned into countless Vajras and scattered around him. Su Ling and Su Kong appeared around him and attacked Li Yundong together. A golden Vajra automatically appeared in front of Li Yundong and slapped at the two Taoists, forcing them to retreat. It was as if thousands of troops and horses were surrounding Li Yundong. Li Yundong recited the mantra and released two Mahamudra in a row, immediately reversing the situation and putting himself in an invincible position. When he recited the mantra and shot out the third light-gathering Buddha's Mahamudra, in an instant, the sky and the earth changed color, and all the light seemed to gather on Li Yundong's Mahamudra. This strong white light seemed to be able to pierce through all the dark evil forces. It squeezed the surrounding air and rushed in all directions like a fierce torrent, rushing toward the five ghosts. How could the five ghosts dare to take such a terrifying light-gathering Buddha's Mahamudra? They immediately let out shrill cries like night owls and instantly rose into the air. Li Yundong snorted coldly and slapped them with another light-gathering Buddha's Mahamudra. The five ghosts were immediately chased around by Li Yundong in a sorry state. They didn't have the time or strength to stir up the evil wind. Meiduo, Dorji Tenzin, and the others were already stunned. Although Meiduo was the heir of Banda Lam and had seen Li Yundong's divine power many times, she still hadn't expected that Li Yundong would be so powerful. Previously, when the two Taoists had fought with them, they had killed several of them in less than a few rounds, and those who had been killed were all powerful Guardian Vajra. However, Li Yundong was fighting against two of them alone, but he was not at a disadvantage at all. This kind of strength was simply terrifying. Dorji Tenzin also widened his eyes and couldn't help sighing. Good. Zhenren Li is really immovable. He's mighty and fierce. Amazing. But as soon as he opened his mouth, Su Ling, who was angry and unable to attack for a long time, suddenly looked at them. He rolled his eyes and immediately smiled sinisterly. Boy, I didn't expect you to have some skills. You've learned the Mahamudra Kung Fu well. However, even if you can guarantee that you won't be eroded by these five ghosts, can you guarantee that they will be fine? After that, he let out a shrill roar and pointed at Meiduo, Dorji Tenzin, and the others. The five ghosts in the air immediately released a gust of evil wind and rushed toward Meiduo and the others. Li Yundong was furious. He immediately released the light-gathering Buddha's Mahamudra, driving the five ghosts away so that they didn't have time to fan the wind. However, even this little bit of evil wind made Meiduo and the others pale with fear. Dorji Tenzin shouted, Vajra formation. The remaining three lamas immediately sat down cross-legged. They sat in the four corners, facing north, south, east, and west. Each of them pinched the immovable fundamental seal and quickly recited scriptures. For a moment, the four guardian Vajra emitted a faint golden light. This golden light slowly connected together and formed a golden barrier, blocking the evil chi outside. However, this Vajra formation could block the poisonous miasma and evil chi, but it couldn't stop Su Ling and Su Kong. The two of them appeared beside Dorji Tenzin and the others in an instant and slapped them on the top of their heads. Li Yundong shouted angrily, and the Yang spirit appeared between Su Ling and Su Kong in an instant. Relying on his six-armed Yang spirit, he blocked their palms at the same time, and at the same time, each of them punched at the other. Immediately, the two of them were hit by Li Yundong's lightning-fast punches, and in an instant, their bodies were shattered. When Meiduo saw this, her face lit up with joy. Then she saw Su Kong and Su Ling appear in front of Li Yundong's body in an instant. The two of them attacked Li Yundong from the front and back. She was shocked and cried out involuntarily, "Watch out!" Li Yundong's young spirit had been lured away by Su Ling and Su Kong. Suddenly, he lost the protection of the Samaya Mahamudra of the Vajra realm and was attacked from both sides. However, Li Yundong was not in a hurry. He turned sideways and quickly pinched out the two Mahamudra of the Reincarnation Nine Prince with both hands, one on the left and the other on the right, towards Su Ling and Su Kong. Su Ling and Su Kong hadn't expected that Li Yundong's two Mahamudra would be so fast. They hadn't even heard him recite the mantra before they hit their faces. Caught off guard, the two of them were immediately sent flying backward. Su Ling was hit in the chest and couldn't help taking a breath of poisonous miasma. Su Kong was hit in the chest by Li Yundong's palm. He spat out a mouthful of blood. When he fell to the ground, he immediately trembled and coughed violently. Li Yundong snorted and said coldly, "You deserve it. I'll let you have a taste of this poisonous miasma." As soon as Su Ling landed on the ground, he rubbed his chest. With a wave of his sleeve, he called the 5 ghosts back in an instant. The 4-colored evil qi in the air also disappeared in an instant. He quickly rushed to Su Kong's side and asked in surprise, "Xueqi, are you all right?" As he said this, he raised his head with a ferocious face and a murderous look in his eyes. "Boy, how dare you hurt my Xueqi? You've pissed me off." Li Yundong saw that he had breathed in a mouthful of poisonous miasma as if nothing had happened. Li Yunyang was slightly stunned, and a faint ominous feeling emerged in his heart. He thought to himself, "This poisonous miasma is fierce and terrifying. Any young spirit master who touches it will rot and die." Not only did this Su Ling touch it, but he also took a breath. How could he not die? Li Yundong's heart suddenly skipped a beat. He thought to himself, could it be that he turned his young spirit into Gang Qi and covered his whole body to form an invisible barrier to isolate the poisonous miasma? However, it was impossible to do this by relying on the young spirit phase alone. Moreover, the young spirit's primordial qi was not enough to resist this terrifying poisonous miasma. Although the primordial young qi of the young spirit phase was strong and thick, it was not substantial after all. Only the primordial qi of the Jinshin phase could be condensed, so thick that no aura could penetrate it. Thinking of this, Li Yundong couldn't help looking at Su Ling in horror and thinking to himself, could he be a Jinshin master? Just as he was thinking about this, he heard Su Ling suddenly shout. The bones all over his body cracked, and his originally short and fat figure slowly grew taller and longer, turning into a powerful and strong man who was as tall as an iron tower. Su Ling's original wretched face also became heroic and threatening, but the fierce light in his eyes was even stronger, as if he had changed from a jackal into a terrifying prehistoric beast. Su Ling stamped his feet, causing the Kari Holy Mountain to tremble. His body rushed toward Li Yundong like a cannonball. Li Yundong immediately pinched the fixed fundamental mudra with both hands and quickly recited the mantra. A Mahamudra blasted toward Su Ling. This time, Su Ling didn't dodge at all. With a grim smile, he bumped into the Mahamudra. With a bang, Su Ling's momentum was slightly delayed. A golden figure appeared behind him in an instant, as if another person had been knocked out of his body by the Mahamudra. But it was only for a moment. In the blink of an eye, the golden figure flew back into Su Ling's body, and Su Ling was unharmed. Li Yundong suddenly gasped. He knew that the golden figure that had been blown out just now was Su Ling's young spirit. And among the cultivators in the young spirit phase in the world, no one's young spirit could withstand his Mahamudra just now without being blown apart. The Su Ling in front of him had taken his palm head-on, but his young spirit had been blown out of his body slightly, and in the blink of an eye, it had returned to normal. This showed that he was definitely a terrifying Jinshin master. Chapter 558. Ever since Li Yundong had reached the top realm of young spirit, it had been difficult for him to make any further progress for a long time. Although his strength in fighting had been growing, what had grown was the increase of his magical items, magic, and moves. Especially after learning the complete version of the mantra Mahamudra, Li Yundong's actual combat strength had doubled. Watch net. 7K. Oath M. However, Li Yundong knew very well that although his fighting strength was constantly getting stronger, his realm had not broken through. The quantitative change could not turn into a qualitative change. He could rely on his powerful magical weapon, powerful fighting skills, and talent to defeat all the masters below the Jinshin phase in the world. But what if he encountered a golden body master? How big is the difference between the top realm of young spirit and the Jinshin realm? In his opinion, the Yongshin phase represented that people had begun to transcend life and death. Even if their physical bodies were destroyed, they could travel out of their bodies and find a new physical body to start their own cultivation again. However, although people in the young spirit phase had transcended life and death, the young spirit could be destroyed, shattered, or even captured and killed. Li Yunyang had once shattered Yen Feng's young spirit with one palm, causing her strength to drop by half. It could be seen that the young spirit was actually a powerful energy body. However, although this energy body was powerful, It was invisible after all and not condensed enough. When it encountered the fierce attack of Xueqi energy, it was easy to collapse. However, after cultivating to the Jinshin phase, the Xueqi energy of one's yang spirit would increase exponentially, and one could begin to resist the bombardment of all kinds of powerful external energy. Even with the improvement of one's realm, the yang spirit of the Jinshin phase could not be destroyed by any magic or magic weapon in the world, thus reaching the point of being immune to all poisons and indestructible. At this time, if the top-notch golden body experts wanted to defeat them, they could only defeat them with a higher realm than them. However, if they wanted to completely destroy them, they could only rely on large-scale spell formations and terrifying lightning tribulations. Li Yundong saw that Su Ling had taken his palm head-on, and the Jinshin yang spirit, which was tightly protecting his body, was shaken out of his body a little, and then continued to pounce on him unscathed. He was shocked and quickly threw out another Vajra fist print. However, relying on his Jinshin phase, Su Ling still didn't dodge and rushed straight toward Li Yundong with a grim smile. With a loud bang, Su Ling's figure only shook slightly, and he rushed toward Li Yundong without slowing down at all, like a whistling cannonball. Li Yundong felt a terrible aura coming at him, like the grim smile of the Grim Reaper. At this moment, it was the first time that Li Yundong had felt so close to death since he had started cultivating. The situation was critical and terrifying, even more so than when he had first faced firearms and pistols. There was a swish behind Li Yundong, and all the hair on his body suddenly stood on end. He immediately kicked his feet and retreated frantically. At the same time, he kept making Mahamudra in his hands and bombarded Su Ling like a storm. However, Su Ling seemed to be deliberately showing off his Jinshin realm. He still didn't dodge. He kept chasing Li Yundong with a grim smile like a maggot attached to a bone. The power of Li Yundong's Mahamudra was terrifying, but whether it was the immovable fundamental print, the Wisdom Fist print, the Vajra Fist print, or the Mahavirokana palm print, when these Mahamudra hit Su Ling's body, they were like stormy waves in the sea, each more ferocious than the last. They slammed hard on the cliff and then quickly shattered, but the boulders on the cliff did not move at all. Is the Jinshin realm so terrifying? Li Yundong was shocked. As he retreated, he exerted his speed to the extreme. At the same time, his hands quickly and crazily released one magic after another. However, Su Ling's whole body seemed to be wrapped in an invisible armor. No matter which magic it was, whether it was gold, wood, water, fire or earth, when they hit his body, they only caused a slight golden ripple. Even the powerful Mahamudra only slightly shook his Jinshin away from his body. However, this was only a momentary flaw. When Li Yundong's next move came, Su Ling instantly returned to his original state. After using some magic and Mahamudra, he suddenly found that almost all of his magic and Mahamudra moves hit Su Ling, but the other party was almost immune to all of them. Could it be? Li Yundong's heart suddenly sank, and an ominous thought flashed through his mind. Master Erdini told me not to go up the mountain from the east because he knew that there was an enemy on the mountain that I couldn't defeat at the moment? Li Yundong knew that if he wanted to escape, although Su Ling and Su Kong were masters of the Jinshin realm, they might not be able to stop him. However, if he ran away, Mei Duo and Dorji Tenzin would definitely die. Li Yundong's mind raced like lightning, and he quickly calculated the countermeasures. At this time, Dorji Tenzin and the other three guardians of the mountain saw that although Li Yundong's magic and Mahamudra were attacking Su Ling wildly, no matter how many times Li Yundong hit him, Su Ling seemed to be fine. However, Li Yundong didn't dare to take a hit from Su Ling. Dorji Tenzin was shocked. He knew that if Li Yundong was defeated, they would all die. He gritted his teeth and immediately shouted in Tibetan, "Zhenrenli can't hold on any longer. Buddha is watching us from heaven. Now it's time for us to make a move." The three lamas all stood up, and a trace of sadness and heroism flashed in their eyes. They knew that they couldn't even defeat Su Ling before. Now that Su Ling's Jinshin was protecting them, they would be cannon fodder if they went forward. They would definitely die. But even though they knew that they were about to die, the three lamas still silently tidied up their red robes and put on the yellow crowns on their heads. They let out a sharp whistle in unison and rushed towards Su Ling. Dorji Tenzin shouted to Li Yundong, "Zhenrenli, we'll hold him back. Take Mei Duo and run." Li Yundong saw three figures flash past him quickly. Like moths flying into a fire, they rushed towards Su Ling without hesitation. However, Su Ling didn't even look at them. He sneered and shook his arms. Like a python driving away a small animal, he instantly sent the 3 strong llamas flying. After the 3 llamas were sent flying, they rolled far away in the snow and spat out a mouthful of blood. However, they immediately got up again. While shouting scriptures, they rushed towards Su Ling again. It was creepy to die fanatically. Li Yundong couldn't bear it. He immediately said to Dorji Tenzin, "Don't fight head-on. Stall him for a while and buy me some time." Although Dorji Tenzin didn't know what Li Yundong wanted to do, he rushed up without hesitation. He also rushed towards Su Ling and was sent flying by Su Ling in the blink of an eye. As soon as he landed, he jumped up like a spring and rushed towards Su Ling again crazily. The 4 guardian sentinels used the wolf pack tactic to attack Su Ling one after another. Although they couldn't cause any damage to Su Ling, he had to be a little upset by the attacks of the 4 guardian sentinels. Therefore, he stopped chasing Li Yundong. Su Ling saw that Li Yundong had flown more than 10 meters away from him in the blink of an eye, and he made a Mahamudra with both hands. This time, Li Yundong recited the mantra for a very long time. As he recited more mantras, a golden Amateus Buddha slowly appeared in front of him. This Amateus Buddha's hands were tied outside, his 2 middle fingers were erected, and his thumbs were crossed like lotus leaves. This Mahamudra was the longest mantra in the Mantra Mahamudra, and it was also the most powerful Amitabha Buddha fundamental seal, also known as the Amateus Buddha fundamental seal. Su Ling only felt that this Buddha was condensing an extremely powerful force. This force faintly revealed the power of the true God, and it even made his yang spirit in the Jinshin phase tremble slightly. The hair on his back stood up, as if he could feel a terrible force rapidly condensing. Su Ling's heart trembled, and he frowned slightly. Although he was a master of the Jinshin phase, even he did not dare to be careless in the face of the full blow of the power of the true God. At this time, Su Kong quickly rushed to his Shixiang Su Ling and whispered a few words to him. Su Ling looked up and saw that the wind and clouds had gathered above his head. Countless dark clouds had gathered in the sky, and the thick dark clouds seemed to be attached to the peak of Kari Holy Mountain. These dark clouds kept rotating, forming a huge vortex. Thunder and lightning flashed in the vortex, as if divine punishment would come at any time. Su Ling immediately cursed. "Damn it, I knew I shouldn't have used the Jinshin phase in such a high place. Damn it, I've really provoked a thunder retribution." Su Kong attached himself to his ear again and whispered a few words. Su Ling immediately turned his head and said unhappily to him, "Am I playing? Do you think I don't want to get rid of this guy as soon as possible?" As he spoke, a llama rushed over from the side. Su Ling suddenly turned his head, and his arms expanded sharply. Suddenly, his 5 fingers grabbed the head of the guardian of the mountain, and he picked him up as if he were picking up a chicken. Su Ling said with a grim smile, "You're courting death." After that, he squeezed his 5 fingers hard, and the head of the guardian of the mountain suddenly cracked like a watermelon. Red and white blood splashed everywhere. Mei Duo, who had been watching the scene in fear, screamed. She couldn't imagine that after she came to Padala Palace, the guardian of the mountain, who had been by her side, would die like this. Mei Duo was so excited that she shouted loudly, "Stop! Stop fighting!" Su Ling glanced at her and sneered. With a flick of his finger, a gust of gang wind immediately shot toward Mei Duo. This gust of gang wind seemed to be understated, but it shot out a trajectory visible to the naked eye, like an invisible bullet flying toward Mei Duo. Dorji Tenzin was shocked and immediately rushed toward Mei Duo like crazy. His burly body blocked her in the blink of an eye. With a puff, a bloody hole was immediately pierced through Dorji Tenzin's chest. The gust of gang wind did not stop, and it hit Mei Duo again. With a clang, it hit the prayer wheel in Mei Duo's arms. Mei Duo's body shook. She watched blankly as Dorji Tenzin's chest fell in front of her, covered in blood. The prayer wheel on her chest, which had blocked the disaster for her, also fell to the ground. There was a sunken finger mark on the exquisite pattern of the prayer wheel. Mei Duo stared blankly at the prayer wheel on the ground and picked it up mechanically. She looked up and saw that the other remaining guardian of the mountain had just rushed towards Su Ling like moths to a flame, but they were killed in front of Su Ling in an instant. Their deaths were extremely miserable. Li Yunyang was still chanting the mantra. The sound of the mantra shook the sky and the earth. Kari Holy Mountain seemed to sense the power of the mantra, and the whole mountain was trembling slightly. Seeing that no one could stop Su Ling from advancing at this time, Mei Duo couldn't help but silently put her palms together, close her eyes and whisper, "Buddha, if I am really the reincarnation of Bonda Lam, Please give me the power of Bonda Lam and let me help my brother Han repel the enemy in front of us. As soon as she finished speaking, the prayer wheel in her hand trembled slightly, and then it began to spin quickly. The wheel spun faster and faster, and countless cyan lights quickly appeared around Kari Holy Mountain, flying toward the wheel in Maidwa's hand. This was the power of the pilgrimage that had been gathered in Kari Holy Mountain for thousands of years. At the same time, it was also the powerful power of the mountain god. Every time the prayer wheel in Maidwa's hand spun, the power gathered would increase a little. Ever since she had entered Patala Palace, she had been empowered by the 9 divisions of the living Buddha's hidden embryo realm and the Vajra realm. At this time, she already had the power of Buddha. This power quickly poured into her body through the Reincarnation Sutra. In an instant, she felt as if there was a violent torrent raging in her body. This powerful and unparalleled force caused Meiduo to suddenly raise her head and let out an extremely sharp howl. This sound seemed to tear the air and pierce the sky. Even Su Ling, who was in the Jinshin phase, couldn't help frowning. At this time, Maidwa's strength was getting stronger and stronger, and her skin was getting more and more terrifying. Her long black hair had also turned blood red, as if she had been soaked in the blood pool of hell. Maidwa's red hair was blown back in the strong wind around her. Her originally beautiful and quiet appearance had now become extremely terrifying and ferocious. She was wearing a piece of human skin, holding a skull stick made of spiritual power in one hand, and a skull bowl filled with blood in the other. There was a string of ferocious and terrifying skulls hanging on her chest. She looked like a devil crawling out of hell, full of death aura, terrifying and ferocious. This was the other battle form of Bonda Lam, the symbol of death and wrath of Tsing Lam. Tomorrow, my mother-in-law will come to Suzhou to see a doctor. I have to accompany her all the way. I have to get up early tomorrow morning to queue up for registration, so I won't be able to make it the next day. Please forgive me. I will make up for it. First published in Chinese. Chapter 559. Raising a Fox Spirit at Home. Chapter 559. Seeking Life in Death. This book is provided free of charge. If you like this book, you can share it with more book friends through the button below. Go to the internet. You can quickly go to the previous or next chapter of the chapter by pressing the left and right arrow keys, and you can quickly return to the full text of Raising a Fox Spirit at Home by pressing the Enter key. In addition, I recommend you something as good-looking as Raising a Fox Spirit at Home. I hope you like it. Tsing Lam suddenly appeared, and the whole Kari Holy Mountain seemed to be shrouded in a layer of black death chi. In addition, thunderclouds were rolling in the sky, and lightning was intertwined, making it even more terrifying and creepy. Su Ling had summoned the 5 ghosts and 5 plagues to cast the evil wind. Compared with this scene, it was like a child's play. It was as if the real God had awakened and was roaring angrily at the world, angry at their offense to the Holy Land and disrespect to the gods. Both Su Ling and Su Kong were stunned. Su Ling saw that Meiduo, who had been fair-skinned and beautiful just now, had turned into a monster in the blink of an eye. She was covered in human skin, with a green face and long sleeves. She was like a demon. He took a closer look at Meiduo and suddenly thought of something. He couldn't help but exclaim in horror, "Are you the reincarnation of Bonda Lam?" "No way." Bonda Lam had the 2 images of Bonda Lam and Tsing Lam. The former represented kindness and quietness, extremely beautiful, elegant, and dignified, but the latter symbolized death and anger. Especially when encountering a strong enemy, the beautiful Bonda Lam would transform into the terrifying Tsing Lam to protect and subdue demons. Although Su Ling and Su Kong had been sealed in the Emperor's clock for nearly 100 years, they were also old cultivators, so they naturally knew the horror of Tsing Lam. In the 7th century AD, when King Songtsen Gampo of Tibet built the Jokhang Temple, he invited Bonda Lam to be the protector of the Jokhang Temple. Later, Bonda Lam was promoted to become the protector of Lhasa city. Unlike the immovable Wisdom King and other Wrath Wisdom Kings, once Bonda Lam appeared, no matter how strong the enemy was, as long as they were stared at by Bonda Lam's wrath eyes, they would definitely be dragged to hell by Tsing Lam. However, Tsing Lam was originally the master of the 3 realms in Tibetan Buddhism, so she could be resurrected from hell indefinitely. But her opponent's soul was forever imprisoned in the skull bowl filled with blood in her hand. For thousands of years, Tibet had been invaded by foreign tribes, as well as foreign cultures and religions. There were countless of them, but Tibetan Buddhism had always stood firm. Among them, Bonda Lam's contribution was second to none. Therefore, in order to commemorate her protection, the Tibetan people spontaneously held the auspicious Heavenly Mother Fantasy Festival on October 10th of the Tibetan calendar every year. Of course, Su Ling and Su Kong knew these terrifying legends about Bonda Lam, but they still stared at Mei Duo, as if they couldn't believe that the beautiful Tibetan girl had turned into a terrifying devil. After Tsing Lam had completely transformed, she closed her eyes, raised her head, and let out an earth-shattering roar and scream. Only then did Su Kong come back to his senses in panic. He quickly attached himself to Su Ling's ear and said a few words. Although Su Ling involuntarily took a step back with a look of fear on his face, there was still unwillingness and greed in his eyes. He quickly glanced at Li Yunyang and said, "Go? Are you kidding me? I haven't gotten this guy's powerful magical weapon yet. I haven't gotten the 1,000-year-old snow lotus yet." Su Kong had an anxious look on his face as he pulled Su Kong's arm with all his might and kept talking in his ear. Su Ling couldn't help but say angrily, "Don't I know that as long as there's life, there's hope? Are we going to fail in our first action since we saw the light again? No, how can we face others in the future? How can we revive the glory of Zenkingism?" As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly felt a terrible chill rushing toward him. Su Ling couldn't help but look in the direction of the aura. As soon as he saw it, his whole body suddenly trembled violently. He saw that Tsing Lam was facing him. She slowly opened her eyes, which were round and bulging, filled with a bloody mist. A heavenly eye was also slowly opening between Tsing Lam's eyebrows. It was also round, but a deep and bottomless black eyeball was emitting a terrible black light, which shot straight at Su Ling. As soon as the light hit Su Ling's body, Su Ling looked at it, and his whole body trembled violently, making him unable to move. Countless black undead flew out of the skull stick in one of Tsing Lam's hands, wailing and pouncing on Su Ling. The skull bowl full of blood in her other hand was boiling. The blood inside was like lava, constantly flowing out of the bowl and dripping to the ground like a waterfall. As soon as the blood splashed on the ground, it immediately melted the snow on the ground, making a sizzling sound. The ground turned black and quickly spread to where Su Ling was standing, as if the gate of hell was opening little by little. Although Su Ling was in the Jinshin phase, he had no temper or room to resist when he encountered the domineering and terrifying Tsing Lam. He could have escaped in time, but because of his greed, he was immediately caught by Tsing Lam. The undead flying out of Tsing Lam's skull stick imprisoned his young spirit, making it impossible for him to escape. In an instant, Su Ling was terrified to the extreme. He wanted to struggle desperately and roar wildly, but he felt as if his whole body had been grabbed by an invisible hand. Not to mention struggling, even moving a little finger was an extravagant dream. Su Kong, who was standing to one side, saw that his Shixiang had been bound by Tsing Lam's angry gaze in an instant. He was shocked and pulled Su Ling frantically, trying to pull him out of the bondage. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake it at all. It was as if Su Ling had been petrified at this time and had become one with Carry Holy Mountain, as heavy as 1,000 pounds. When Su Kong saw the blood flowing out of Tsing Lam's skull bowl approaching his Shixiang little by little, he was shocked, anxious and frightened. He couldn't help but let out a desperate roar. In the midst of this roar, Li Yunyang finally finished reciting the mantra. At this time, there was a 3-meter-tall Amateus Buddha standing in front of him. This Buddha was shining with golden light, holding the Amateus Buddha fundamental seal in his hand. He was majestic and awe-inspiring, making people feel fear just by looking at him and not dare to fight with him. When Li Yundong had been reciting the mantra, his divine sense had already reached a state of no self, no other, and no living beings. After reciting the mantra, his divine sense recovered. Just as he was about to release the Mahamudra, he was shocked to find that Mei Duo had transformed into Tsing Lam. Li Yundong naturally knew that if Tsing Lam glared at anyone with her heavenly eyes of anger, that person would be dragged into hell by her. At the same time, Tsing Lam's incarnation in this world would also die. This was Tsing Lam's unique skill of exchanging one life for another. It was naturally a good thing to be able to kill Su Ling, but Li Yundong didn't want Mei Duo to exchange her life for Su Ling's. Li Yundong suddenly roared, "Mei Duo, don't!" But at this time, Mei Duo had already transformed into Tsing Lam, and her divine sense had already been lost. How could she hear Li Yundong's words? The fierce and ferocious light in her eyes became stronger and stronger, especially when the blood flowing out of the skull bowl in her hand touched Su Ling's body. Suddenly, hell seemed to be connected with Su Ling in an instant. From the skull bowl in Tsing Lam's hand, countless undead who had been dragged into hell by Tsing Lam instantly boiled up. The ghouls roared and howled as they rushed toward the ethereals. Bonda Lam had fought countless battles for thousands of years. It was unknown how many terrifying enemies she had killed with Tsing Lam's death stare. Almost every one of the undead in the skull bowl in her hand had a much stronger background than Su Ling. Just one of them was enough to pull Su Ling's soul out of his body, let alone so many densely packed undead pouncing on him at the same time. At this moment, heaven and earth were silent, and the wind and clouds changed color. The sky seemed to have lost all the light, and only the whistling dark-colored undead pounced on Su Ling. Li Yundong's heart was burning with anxiety. He knew that once these undead pulled out Su Ling's soul, they would turn around and pull out Meidua's soul as well. Then they would enter hell together and perish together. Once that happened, there would be no turning back. Even if he really appeared in the real body of the immovable Wisdom King, he would not be able to change the reality. Li Yundong's thoughts raced like lightning, and he immediately slapped Su Ling with his Mahamudra. In the dark sky, a golden light suddenly lit up. This golden light was like a golden sword shot out of the thick dark clouds by the sun. It pierced through the whistling souls and slapped heavily on Su Ling's body. At this time, Su Ling was bound by Bonda Lam's power of the undead and could not move. He was like a wooden stake, firmly eating Li Yundong's most powerful Mahamudra. Suddenly, Su Ling's body shook violently. The power of the undead that bound his body was instantly dispelled by Li Yundong's mighty power of the Holy Spirit. In an instant, Su Ling also regained his mobility. Although Su Ling had been freed from the shackles, Li Yundong's Mahamudra was not finished. His body-protecting Jinshin was instantly blasted out of his body and flew into the air, shattering into countless golden light spots. Su Kong, who was standing to one side, saw that his Shixiang's Yang spirit in the Jinshin phase had been shattered by Li Yundong's Mahamudra, and his body had also been smashed to the point that all the bones in his body seemed to be broken. For a moment, he almost collapsed to the ground. In shock, he looked at Li Yundong in fear. Without saying a word, he wanted to pull his Shixiang away from this terrible place. But as soon as Su Kong moved, he heard a shrill roar coming toward him. Su Kong subconsciously turned his head and saw that Tsing Lam had just tried to drag Su Ling into hell with her death stare, but she had failed because of Li Yundong's intervention, so she subconsciously aimed at Su Kong again. When he looked in the void, he immediately saw a dead black eye between Tsing Lam's eyebrows staring at him. He was so shocked that his whole body turned cold. When Su Kong saw that his senior brother had almost lost his life after being glanced at by Tsing Lam, he was shocked. Without thinking, he raised his hand and stretched out 2 fingers, stabbing them into his own eye sockets. With a puff, Su Kong's eyes were suddenly blinded. He let out a painful roar, pulled his senior brother Su Ling, and rose into the air in an instant, quickly fleeing toward the horizon. Want to run? Li Yundong gritted his teeth and was about to chase after him when he heard a shrill roar. A cold and terrifying aura instantly locked onto him. Li Yundong's body suddenly trembled, and an ominous premonition flashed through his heart. Could it be that Tsing Lam is staring at me? Li Yundong's body was stiff, and he slowly turned his head. Sure enough, he saw Tsing Lam staring at him with her terrifying black eyes of death, and a terrifying aura rushed toward Li Yundong. After a busy day, he woke up at 5 o'clock this morning and fainted. I guess I won't be able to make it up today. I'll make it up tomorrow. There will be one more chapter in a while. Are you ready to rest? It's convenient for you to continue reading next time. Raising a Fox Spirit at Home. Readers who like to raise a fox spirit at home also like to read the following on this site. Open it and see if it meets your taste. Chapter 560. Raising a Fox Spirit at Home. Main text. Chapter 560. Snow Lotus appearance is provided free of charge. If you like this book, you can share it with more book friends through the button below. Go to the internet. You can quickly go to the previous or next chapter of the chapter by pressing the left and right arrow keys, and you can quickly return to the full text of Raising a Fox Spirit at Home by pressing the Enter key. In addition, I recommend you something that is as beautiful as Raising a Fox Spirit at Home. I hope you like it. Li Yundong hadn't expected that as soon as Su Ling and Su Kong escaped, Tsing Lam would target him again. He was shocked and immediately turned his head and closed his eyes. But when Li Yundong closed his eyes, he could still clearly see Tsing Lam's eyes of death staring at him. Many undead flew out of the skull stick in her wrist and pounced on him. Li Yundong's heart trembled. Just as he was about to clench his teeth and make a Mahamudra to resist, he heard Dorji Tenzin shouting loudly, "Zhenren Li, you are the king of all wisdom kings, the reincarnation of the immovable wisdom king, the head of all wisdom kings, and the incarnation of the power of Buddha's anger. The only one in the world who can subdue and contend with Bonda Lam is you. Don't do anything, Mei Duo will die. Wake her up with the mantra." Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly released his yang spirit, and the immovable wisdom king's Fa's hen with 3 heads and 6 arms appeared in front of him in an instant. The immovable wisdom king suddenly appeared, and his 6 hands formed 3 immovable fundamental seals, namely the immovable wisdom king fundamental seal, the Amitabha fundamental seal, and the medicine Buddha fundamental seal. As soon as the 3 fundamental prints were pinched out, a golden barrier suddenly appeared in front of Li Yunyang's wisdom king's Fa's hen. The undead released by Tsing Lam crashed into the golden barrier with a loud bang, causing the entire Kari Holy Mountain to tremble violently. The black undead seemed to scatter in all directions like a torrent, immediately surging in all directions, hovering and howling between heaven and earth. Although Tsing Lam's power was powerful, because it represented the power of the dead, it was naturally restrained by the power of the immovable Wisdom King's Holy Spirit. In addition, Tsing Lam and the immovable Wisdom King were both gods. When their powers collided, Tsing Lam's body suddenly trembled, and her angry eyes revealed a trace of confusion, as if she didn't understand why her power couldn't restrain the person in front of her. When Li Yunyang saw the anger in Meiduo's eyes, he immediately made another Mahamudra with both hands. It was the Mahamudra of the heavenly drum thunder sound. He shouted the mantra and roared, "Nan! 3 Mandobo Tua Nan! Zonghe! Shaha!" The heavenly drum thunder sound Rulai was one of the 5 Buddhas in the womb. He specialized in using the roar of thunder to wake all living beings up, so that they wouldn't go astray and fall into the devil's barrier. Li Yunyang's roar immediately made Tsing Lam tremble all over, and the fierce light in her eyes became fainter and fainter. At this time, Mei Duo only felt that she was in a boundless darkness, surrounded by a boiling and blazing aura, as if she was in a volcanic lava. Just as she was in a panic, she heard a faint sound coming from the distant dark sky, like a morning bell and evening drum, which attracted all her attention. Mei Duo looked up in the direction of the sound in the dark sky, only to see a trace of light in the distant sky. Although the light was weak, it made Mei Duo feel a trace of refreshing and peaceful aura, which made her whole body feel cool. She was no longer burned and tortured by the blazing flames as before. Seeing that the fierce light in Tsing Lam's eyes was fading, Li Yunyang immediately cheered up and shouted, "Mei Duo, can you hear me? Mei Duo!" As Li Yunyang kept shouting, the terrifying aura of death around Tsing Lam's body became fainter and fainter. The undead she had released slowly returned to the skull stick, and the blood that had stained the sacred Kari Holy Mountain slowly flowed back into the skull bowl. The terrifying eye of death between her eyebrows also slowly closed. Gradually, Tsing Lam's towering sleeves slowly fell down and turned back into black hair. Her dark skin and face also became snow-white and delicate, and she turned back into the beautiful Mei Duo. Li Yunyang saw that Mei Duo had gradually recovered. She stood quietly in place with her eyes closed, and her long eyelashes trembled gently, like a budding lotus. Li Yunyang was pleasantly surprised. He also took back his yang spirit Fa's hen, stepped forward quickly, and shouted softly, "Mei Duo? Wake up!" Meiduo's eyelashes trembled for a while, and she slowly opened her eyes. This time, there was no longer a terrifying aura of death in her eyes. Instead, there was a pure and penetrating gaze. Mei Duo looked at Li Yunyang with some flickering eyes, as if she was a little infatuated. She looked at Li Yunyang affectionately and asked tentatively, "Brother Han, am I still alive?" Li Yunyang was overjoyed. He raised his head and laughed. He grabbed Meiduo's arm with both hands and said with a smile, "Of course you're alive and well." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly thought of something and immediately turned his head to look at Dorji Tenzin, who was next to him. He saw that Dorji Tenzin was lying on the ground, barely propping himself up. His chest was covered in blood, but his face was full of a smile of survival. Li Yunyang immediately rushed over to him and quickly tapped his chest with his fingers to help him stop the bleeding. He then carefully examined the wound. Dorji Tenzin covered his chest with one hand and said with a smile, "It's okay. It's still far from the heart." I won't die. Li Yunyang took a look and saw that the wound had just passed through the 2 lung lobes. It had not hurt the internal organs. It was just a flesh wound. He immediately breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Fortunately, it didn't hurt the vital parts." Dorji Tenzin laughed and said, "I told you I wouldn't die." His laughter immediately affected the wound, and he coughed up blood again. Meiduo also bent down anxiously and said with some reproach, "Dorji Tenzin, don't talk." Dorji Tenzin glanced at Meiduo, his eyes full of awe. He struggled to move his body, as if he wanted to turn over and lie on the ground. Meiduo immediately pressed his shoulder with both hands and said in surprise, "What are you doing? Why do you still want to move with such an injury?" Dorji Tenzin gasped for breath and forced a smile. "Bonda Lam, I can't speak to you so disrespectfully." "It's disrespectful," Meiduo said anxiously. "What do you mean? Without you, I would have died a long time ago." However, Dorji Tenzin shook his head stubbornly and said, "No, my life has long been dedicated to Buddha. It is my duty to protect you, and it is my responsibility to revere the gods." After that, he turned over again. As he moved, a lot of blood flowed out of his chest. Li Yunyang pointed at Dorji Tenzin's chest with one hand and said in a deep voice, "Master Dorji Tenzin, what you said is wrong. Since you said that it is your responsibility to revere the gods, but Bonda Lam told you not to move, should you listen?" Dorji Tenzin was stunned. "But," Li Yunyang said again, "if you think that Bonda Lam alone is not enough, then you can say that I am the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King. What if I also tell you not to move?" Dorji Tenzin stopped talking. He sighed and stopped moving. He put his palms together, closed his eyes, and silently recited the scriptures. Seeing that Dorji Tenzin had been persuaded, Li Yunyang breathed a sigh of relief and looked at Meiduo, only to see that she was also looking at him. The two of them looked at each other and immediately smiled. Meiduo looked at Li Yunyang with infatuation and suddenly looked away shyly. As soon as she saw the bloody corpse of the guardian of the mountain in the snow, she immediately showed a sad expression. She knelt down devoutly, put her palms together, and began to recite the Buddhist scriptures in a low voice. Li Yunyang accompanied her silently. After she finished reciting the Buddhist scriptures and stood up, he sighed softly and said, "They have already entered the cycle of reincarnation. I believe that they will live a very good life in their next life." Meiduo's eyes flashed with holiness and sadness. She looked to the west and said softly, "I hope they will live a happy life in their next life." Li Yunyang and Meiduo stood side by side. After a moment of silence he asked softly, "Why are you here?" Meiduo said softly, "After the Heavenly Mother went on a trip, the living Buddha returned to the palace and did the 9 divisions of the Vajra realm and the hidden embryo realm for me. Then he asked me to go to the Kari Holy Mountain to get the approval of the God of Heaven and the divine power of Bonda Lam. So I came with the guardian of the mountain." As she spoke, Meiduo looked sadly at the dead guardian of the mountain and sighed. "I didn't expect to see these 2 evil Taoists on the mountain. When we met, they asked us where the 1,000-year snow lotus was. Dorji Tenzin told them that the 1,000-year snow lotus was a treasure of the esoteric sect and they couldn't pick it. The 2 sides didn't get along well with each other, so they started fighting." After hearing this, Li Yunyang sighed and said, "If you hadn't transformed into Tsing Lam, I'm afraid you wouldn't have been able to drive these 2 Taoists away. The Jinshin phase is really terrible." Meiduo turned her head and looked at Li Yunyang with deep eyes. Suddenly, she smiled slightly, like a blooming water lotus. In an instant, the brilliance was dazzling. "As soon as I saw you coming, I felt safe. I knew you could save me." Hearing this, Li Yunyang felt ashamed in his heart. He thought to himself, "It was you who saved me. It seems that I really have to find a way to get the Dun Jindan. Otherwise, if I encounter a Jinshin master, I will almost certainly lose." Although the power of the Amateus Buddha's fundamental seal was amazing, no matter how strong it was, it had to hit the target. If it weren't for Tsing Lam restraining Su Ling, it would have been impossible for him to hit Su Ling, who was astonishingly fast. Li Yunyang sighed. He hesitated for a moment and said, "Meiduo, do you know that you are actually not the real Bonda Lam?" Meiduo smiled and said softly, "I know." Li Yunyang was stunned and asked in surprise, "You know? How do you know?" Meiduo smiled and said softly, When the living Buddha gave me the 9 divisions of the Vajra realm and the hidden embryo realm, he told me everything. Li Yunyang was shocked and said, "But you are obviously not Bonda Lam, so why did the living Buddha give you enlightenment like this?" Maidwa's eyes flashed as she looked at Li Yundong. For a moment, she couldn't help but hold his hand with one hand and press the other on his chest. She whispered, "Brother Han, do you know what I'm doing? When I was traveling in the divine dance, I heard your voice. At that time, I was so happy that my heart was about to fly out. But, soon, the prayer wheel in my arms rang." As she spoke, Meiduo withdrew her hand from Li Yunyang's chest and touched the prayer wheel in her arms. She said softly, "I know. This is my mission. Since my compatriots all recognize me as Bonda Lam, then I am Bonda Lam. I should do something for my compatriots." When Li Yunyang heard this, he couldn't help but sigh with emotion. No wonder people say that the will of the people is the will of heaven. When the people think that you are a god, no matter what your identity is, you are already a god. It was the same for Tsongyang Gyatso. He was originally just a young and ordinary boy, but when he was selected as the 6th Great Lama, he was destined to take an unusual path. But, Meiduo. Li Yunyang looked at Meiduo with pity and said softly, "Are you really confident that you can walk this path well?" Meiduo looked at Li Yunyang in a daze and said softly, "At the most unexpected time in my life, I can always meet you. Brother Han, don't worry. I will definitely walk a good path. Because I know that when I am in danger, you will definitely appear, won't you?" Li Yunyang couldn't help sighing in his heart and thinking, since ancient times, love has been the most torturous thing. Now it seems that it's really good. Li Yunyang smiled and said softly, "Fool. Just now, you almost lost your life. In the future, don't fight with others so easily. Do you understand?" It was the first time that Meiduo had seen Li Yunyang take the initiative to care about her. She was extremely moved. She smiled sweetly and was about to speak when she saw a ray of sunlight suddenly cast down from the originally dark sky. This ray of sunlight was extremely conspicuous in the dark sky. Meiduo looked at it and was immediately stunned. Then she pulled Li Yunyang's arm in surprise and shouted, "Look, look!" Li Yundong followed her gaze and saw that in the place where the sun was shining, there was a snow lotus with white petals, surrounded by a few green leaves. It was gently swaying in the crevice of the iceberg. It was crystal clear and pure. Are you ready to rest? It's convenient for you to continue reading next time. Raising a Fox Spirit at Home. Readers who like to raise a fox spirit at home also like to read the following on this website. Open it and see if it meets your taste. Chapter 561. Meiduo looked at the snow lotus that had suddenly appeared, and her eyes were full of surprise. She said happily, "Is this the 1,000-year-old snow lotus? This is the first time I've seen it." As she spoke, she quickly ran to the side of the 1,000-year-old snow lotus, squatted down gently, and touched the petals of the snow lotus with her hand. She turned her head and said to Li Yundong with a smile on her face, "I used to hear many old people say that the 1,000-year-old snow lotus is a mountain-protecting treasure of the holy mountain, but no one has ever seen it. Today, I finally see it. Let's go." 7K. O.M. Li Yundong fixed his eyes on the swaying 1,000-year-old snow lotus, only to see that the snow around it was stained with blood, as if it had absorbed human blood. The snow lotus was in full bloom, and it was particularly gorgeous and dazzling. Li Yundong sighed and said, "Many people have died for this 1,000-year-old snow lotus." Meiduo also stood up, put her palms together, and silently recited a passage of scripture. She sighed softly and said, "Yes, the old people say that although the 1,000-year-old snow lotus is a holy object, it is also an ominous thing. Every time it appears, it will set off a bloody storm." Li Yundong was silent. He thought of what had happened before and couldn't help but feel a lingering fear. If it hadn't been for all kinds of coincidences, he would have been killed by the spirit and space Taoists. Moreover, although Taoist Su Ling was arrogant and seemed to be brainless, his strength was not to be trifled with. For the first time, he had let him understand how terrifying the Jinshin phase was. Although he had never met an opponent in the Yang spirit phase, a master in the Jinshin phase was far from what he could deal with. When the two sides fought, regardless of powerful magical weapons and magic, a master in the Jinshin phase would be able to ensure that he was invincible by relying on his powerful protective Jinshin. As the saying goes, fighting is like using a weapon. A fighter should think about defeat before thinking about victory. When a master in the Jinshin phase met a master in the Yang spirit phase, there was no need to think about defeat at all, because no matter how powerful a master in the Yang spirit phase was, he could not break the protective Jinshin of a master in the Jinshin phase. In this way, one side would be afraid of the other side hitting him, while the other side would be unscrupulous and go on a rampage. How could he not win? The Yang spirit and the Jinshin were only one level apart, but the difference was like heaven and earth. Ever since Su Chan had been taken away by Ao Wushuang, Li Yundong had felt that he was too weak to protect the people around him. But as his cultivation had advanced by leaps and bounds, he had progressed at a rapid pace. It could be said that he was invincible. Even if he met someone stronger than him, Li Yundong could defeat the strong. However, when a cultivator reached the Jinshin phase, defeating the strong with the weak would become an untouchable myth. Once the gap between the Yang spirit and the Jinshin was widened, it would become an insurmountable chasm. No magic weapon or magic could make up for the gap between the two sides. This was the principle behind the so-called one man can defeat 10 men. I have to cultivate to the Jinshin phase. Li Yundong thought silently, especially when he remembered that when Su Kong had escaped in the end, he had pulled his Shixiang away even if he had been blinded. This kind of decisiveness of a strong soldier was really frightening and unsettling when it came to the enemy. Thinking of this, Li Yundong couldn't help but think of Yan Feng. For a moment, he was a little worried and thought to himself, there are more and more enemies. In the past, there was Yan Feng who could endure and hide in the dark, which was enough to make me restless. Now there is Ling Kong and Ling of Zenkingism, and one of them is a Jinshin master. I don't know how Su Ling's injury is. How did my Mahamudra hurt him? If he's injured, then it's fine. At least I know that there's a way to deal with a golden body expert. If he's not injured, then it's really too terrifying. None of my spells can injure him. I must immediately cultivate to the golden body realm. While Li Yundong was thinking, Mei Duo, who was beside him, looked at his face, which was lost in thought. At this time, Su Ling, who had used the Jinshin, had already left Carry Holy Mountain, and Mei Duo had also returned to her original form from the state of Tsing Lam. For a time, Carry Holy Mountain slowly returned to peace and tranquility. The thick dark clouds that had been hovering in the sky also slowly dissipated. More and more sunlight was projected through the clouds onto the snowy mountain, shining on the side of Li Yundong's face, making his handsome and thin face look a little dazzling. Especially when Li Yundong turned his face, Mei Duo suddenly felt that although Li Yundong was against the light, his whole body was shining with golden light, as if he was wearing a golden cassock. Mei Duo's heart couldn't help pounding. She thought to herself, no wonder the living Buddha said that Han brother is the reincarnation of Wisdom King. He is really powerful. I didn't like the wrong person. Li Yundong didn't know what Mei Duo was thinking. He was full of hesitation, thinking about how to ask Mei Duo for the 1,000-year-old snow lotus. But Mei Duo, who was clever, saw that Li Yundong had been staring at the 1,000-year-old snow lotus, but he had been hesitating to speak. She immediately reacted, smiled sweetly, squatted down, and picked up the snow lotus. She held it in front of Li Yundong with both hands and said with a smile, Han brother, here you are. Li Yundong was stunned and found that the words he had been thinking about for a long time were useless. Even though he was usually eloquent, at this time, he became a little tongue-tied. He stammered, Mei Duo, this. Mei Duo looked at Li Yundong strangely and said with a smile, what's wrong? Didn't you come here for this? The living Buddha said that you came here for this. Li Yundong sighed inwardly. He had always been afraid that Mei Duo would be sad if she knew this, so he couldn't say anything. Seeing that Mei Duo was very clever and took the initiative to offer the 1,000-year-old snow lotus, he was moved and grateful. He didn't pretend to be pretentious and carefully took the 1,000-year-old snow lotus with both hands. Just as he was about to put it in his arms, Mei Duo suddenly stopped him. Mei Duo sighed and took out a snow-white handkerchief from her arms. Then, she reached out and carefully wrapped the 1,000-year-old snow lotus in Li Yundong's palm. Then she said with a smile, well, that's good. This is a treasure of our holy mountain. Don't break it. Li Yundong fixed his eyes on Mei Duo and couldn't help asking, Mei Duo, aren't you going to ask me what I want this 1,000-year-old snow lotus for? Mei Duo shook her head and said with a smile, why should I know? Anyway, You definitely won't use such a treasure to do bad things like those two evil Taoists. Li Yundong nodded slightly and didn't say anything more. He hid the 1,000-year-old snow lotus in his arms and said to Meiduo, "Let's go. I'll take you back to Lhasa, okay?" Meiduo's face lit up with joy. Just as she was about to agree, she stopped. She looked at the guardian of the mountain who had fallen to the ground and said softly, "No, I still have to help the dead guardian of the mountain with a sky burial. I'm afraid it will take me 1 or 2 days." Li Yundong hesitated for a moment. He had thought that it would only take him 1 or 2 days to go back and forth from Tibet, but he hadn't expected that he had already been delayed for 3 days. Now the Fox Zen School was suffering from internal and external troubles, and he had just provoked 2 powerful devils. If he was delayed for another day or 2, he wouldn't be at ease after being away for so long. Meiduo observed Li Yundong's expression. She saw the lingering worry between Li Yundong's brows, so she said with a smile, "Brother Han, if you have something to do, you can go first." "It doesn't matter." Seeing that Meiduo was so considerate, Li Yundong felt relieved, but he still felt a little uncomfortable, as if he had done something sinful. He sighed in his heart and said to Meiduo, "I'll come to see you when I have time in the future, okay?" Although Meiduo was persuading Li Yundong to leave on the surface, she was actually hoping that he would stay. When she heard that Li Yundong was going to leave, her heart suddenly ached, and she was so sad that she almost burst into tears. She looked at Li Yundong foolishly, but her face was still smiling. She said, "Okay, Brother Han, in the future, you must come to see me." Li Yundong nodded. He thought for a moment and said, "Meiduo, if one day you are no longer Bonda Lam, what are you going to do?" Meiduo's heart skipped a beat. She looked at Li Yundong with flickering eyes and almost blurted out a bold sentence, but when the words reached her mouth, she stopped. She hesitated for a moment and finally said with a smile, "If I'm not Bonda Lam, then, let's talk about it when you come." Li Yundong didn't notice what Meiduo was thinking. He smiled and said, "Well, I'll go first. I'll come to see you later." After that, he nodded to Meiduo and Dorji Tenzin and quickly turned into a beam of blue light and flew away. Meiduo watched Li Yundong's figure disappear into the sky in an instant, and her body suddenly stiffened. She subconsciously reached out her hand, as if she wanted to grab Li Yundong. However, as soon as she reached out in the air, she froze again, as if she had turned into a stone statue, standing there blankly. After a long time, Meiduo's eyes gradually became misty as she looked at the distant sky. She suddenly shouted in the direction where Li Yundong had left, "Brother Han, I want you to stay. If I'm not Bonda Lam one day and I go to find you, will you let me stay?" For a moment, Meiduo's shouts echoed between Kari Holy Mountain and the sky. Li Yundong had already disappeared without a trace. No one could answer Meiduo's words. Only the sky was cold and silent, and the earth was heavy and heavy. Dorji Tenzin, who was standing to one side, couldn't help sighing in his heart. He silently put his palms together and sighed softly. "Amitba." After a long time, Meiduo turned around, wiped her tears, and forced a smile. "Master Dorji Tenzin, let's go." Just as Meiduo and Dorji Tenzin were going down the mountain, not far from Kari Holy Mountain, Xueqi and Su Ling were hiding at the foot of a hidden mountain, secretly healing their wounds. Xueqi had blinded himself. Although the pain was unbearable, he was, after all, a cultivator with high cultivation and a yang spirit master. His yang spirit went out of his body, guided his body, and carried his almost paralyzed Xixiang to an inconspicuous place. After Su Ling got rid of Tsing Lam's death stare, he had been in a stiff state for a long time. Especially after his body had been hit by Li Yundong's Amateus Buddha seal, his body had been seriously injured and it was even more difficult for him to move. However, as Su Ling gradually broke free from the shackles of the power of death, although his body had been injured, his meridians and internal organs had not been injured. In particular, the qi and blood all over his body were still running as usual. Su Ling slowly mobilized his qi. After recuperating for a while, the bones all over his body made a messy sound, as if they were washing his meridians. After about a few hours, his figure gradually changed back to his previous short and fat appearance. After Su Ling finished running the last round of qi, he jumped up and looked nervously at his Xixiang, Su Kong. Although he had been shocked by the power of Tsing Lam to the point of being unable to move, His mind was still very clear. He clearly remembered what had happened before, especially when his junior brother had destroyed his own eyes to save him, which made him even more pained and angry. Su Ling grabbed Su Kong's shoulder and looked at the two bloody holes in his eyes in shock and anger. He couldn't help roaring, "Shi Xiang, I will definitely avenge you." After Su Kong found a place to settle down, he hid his young spirit and carefully restrained his qi, lest the enemy find them. At this time, when he heard Su Ling's voice, he knew that his Shi Xiang had recovered. He grinned and whispered a few words in Su Ling's ear. Su Ling was furious and roared, "How can I do that? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. I must take revenge." Su Kong looked anxious and whispered a few words in Su Ling's ear. Su Ling's angry face froze. He suppressed his anger and said, "What should we do? Could it be that he had to swallow this grievance just like that? Humph, although that Xing Lam is terrible, that little bastard is a soft persimmon. When I recover my strength, I will dig out his eyes to vent your anger." Su Kong shook his head and whispered a few more words in Su Ling's ear. Su Ling was stunned and said, "They're in cahoots? What you said is possible. It seems that these guys are indeed in the same group. Damn it, so what if they are in the same group? When has Zenkingism ever been afraid of the esoteric sect?" As he said this, Su Ling seemed to have thought of something. He said with a grim smile, "Shi Xiang, let's find the current leader of Zenkingism and kill him. We can reorganize Zenkingism ourselves. At that time, we won't have to be afraid of the esoteric sect and Xing Lam. At that time, we can take revenge for your blindness." I got home very late. I hurriedly wrote a chapter. When I wanted to upload it, I found that I couldn't log on to the website. In addition, I came back too late today. I guess I won't be able to make up for yesterday's chapter, so I have no choice but to break my promise. I apologize to everyone. I will try my best to make it up tomorrow. In addition, there will be another chapter in a while, which is the normal second chapter for today. Chapter 562. Li Yundong flew all the way back to Tiannan City from Tibet. When he got home, as soon as he opened the door, he saw that everyone from the Fox Zen School was sitting in the living room. Even Su Chan, Zhou Qin, Zi Yuan, and Ruan Mingling were there. Everyone was gathered together with serious faces, and the atmosphere was heavy. Go to see. 7K. Oath M. Li Yundong was stunned and asked curiously, "Are you all here?" When Su Chan heard the sound of the door, she turned her head and immediately became happy. She rushed over like a swallow flying into the forest and said happily, "Yundong, you're finally back." Li Yundong smiled and was about to hold her in his arms, but he suddenly remembered that he still had the 1,000-year-old snow lotus in his arms. He immediately put his hands on her shoulders and said with a smile, "Don't mess around. If you break it, it will be terrible." Su Chan blinked and couldn't help looking at Li Yundong's arms. She asked curiously, "What's wrong?" But as soon as she finished speaking, she immediately thought of something and said in surprise, "Did you get the 1,000-year-old snow lotus back?" Li Yundong laughed and took out a snow lotus wrapped in a white handkerchief from his arms. He said with a smile, "Not bad, you're very smart." Hearing the words 1,000-year-old snow lotus, the others in the room suddenly stood up in unison. They exclaimed and surrounded him curiously. Even Zi Yuan couldn't help but look at Li Yundong's hands curiously. The 1,000-year-old snow lotus was an extremely important guiding drug for Dun Jindan. Whether it could be made into a Dun Jindan or not had a great relationship with the appearance of the 1,000-year-old snow lotus. Since the Ming dynasty, no one had been able to refine the Dun Jindan. This was closely related to the loss of the Medicine King tripod and the 3 elixir classics, and also to the fact that the 1,000-year-old snow lotus had not appeared for hundreds of years. At this time, Li Yundong had obtained the 1,000-year-old snow lotus, so it could be said that the Dun Jindan was only one step away from him. Even though Zi Yuan was usually calm and indifferent and didn't care about anything, she still said in surprise, "You got it? That's great." Since ancient times, external alchemy has said that Ren Yuan Jindan is easy to refine, but the 1,000-year-old snow lotus is hard to find. Now that you have the 1,000-year-old snow lotus, it should be Wang Jinyuan begging you, not you begging him. Zhou Qin, Ruan Xiuling, and the others also curiously approached Li Yundong and carefully looked at the snow lotus in his hand. She saw that the snow lotus in Li Yundong's hand was wrapped in a handkerchief, and the corner of the handkerchief was embroidered with 2 rows of Tibetan and Chinese characters. One of the rows of characters was embroidered with 2 delicate Chinese characters. Mei Duo. Xueqi's heart skipped a beat and she couldn't help glancing at him. She asked softly, "Master, did you meet Mei Duo?" Li Yunyang nodded and told them about his trip to Tibet. Especially when he said that he had met Su Ling and Su Kong in the Snow Mountain, and that Su Ling was a Jinshin master. Everyone in the room was so shocked that they couldn't help but let out a cry of surprise. A golden body master? Ruan Xiuling couldn't help but widen her eyes. She exclaimed, "Which sect's golden body master is he from? The 10 golden bodies are making their moves so early? How did you defeat them?" Defeat? Li Yundong shook his head and laughed. A Jinshin master is not someone who can be defeated by someone in the Yongshin phase like Miel. Although Su Chan knew that since Li Yundong was safe and sound in front of her, it must have been a battle without any danger. She still grabbed Li Yundong's sleeve nervously and asked, "Yundong, how did you win?" Li Yundong sighed and said, "If it weren't for Dorji Tenzin and the others fighting with their lives to hold Su Ling back, and if it weren't for Mei Duo transforming into Tsing Lam, I'm afraid things would have been very difficult to deal with." Xueqi couldn't help but let out a cry and asked, "Mei Duo transformed into Tsing Lam?" She isn't." Li Yundong looked at Xueqi and nodded meaningfully. "Yes, Mei Duo is indeed not the reincarnation of Bonda Lam, but why can she still inherit the power of Bonda Lam, right?" Xueqi nodded, her face full of surprise. "Yes, why?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Taoism and Buddhism have been 2 different cultivation sects since ancient times. The reason why they are different is largely reflected in the inheritance of cultivation power. The growth of Taoism's power comes from the external elixir and Niden. Once the Niden is formed and becomes the Yang spirit, they can transcend the 5 elements and jump out of the reincarnation of all living beings. They can continue to pass on their power indefinitely through the transfer of the Yang spirit until they don't want to live in the world anymore and decide to ascend. The inheritance of this kind of power of Taoism is straight like flowing water, while the power of Buddhism is folded like a storage cabinet. It focuses on inheritance and opportunity. As long as the living Buddha and the people think that you are the heir, you can inherit this power. As for whether you are really reincarnated and have a real bloodline, it doesn't matter." Zi Yuan, who was standing to one side, also nodded and said, "That's right. Why can Guan Yu become a warrior sage but Lu Bu can't? It's because all the dynasties respected his loyalty and worshipped him. The powerful power of faith and incense made him transcend the mortal world and become a warrior sage, ranking among the immortals." Li Yundong said appreciatively, "That's right. In the Tang dynasty, Master Hirofa of the Japanese Zhenyan Tantrism came to China to learn Buddhism. At that time, Huigua Ali, the 7th patriarch of the Tang sect in China, had a premonition that there would be a disaster of Buddhism in the future. Only Hirofa, an outsider, could save the Tantrism, so he decided to pass on all his skills and powerful magical weapons to Hirofa, who had been apprenticed to him for less than half a year. Therefore, after Hirofa came to China, he immediately became a top cultivator after cultivating for less than half a year. After returning to Japan, he immediately established a sect and founded the Zhenyan Tantrism, which has a history of 1,200 years. Xueqi listened carefully. She couldn't help asking, "What about Master Huigua Ali?" Li Yundong sighed slightly. Not long after Master Hirofa left China, Emperor Wuzong of the Tang dynasty launched a famous disaster in the history of Buddhism, that is, the Huichang Dharma disaster. At that time, more than 4,600 temples were demolished in the Tang dynasty. After passing on his skills to Hirofa, Huigua Ali died soon after. However, because he had accurately predicted the consequences when he was alive, the Tantrism was cut off in China, and the incense of the Tantrism took root in Japan under the promotion of Master Hirofa. As he said this, Li Yundong sighed and said, "Xueqi, even if you are the reincarnation of Bonda Lam, if you are not recognized by the living Buddha and the people of Tibet, you will not be able to inherit the power of Bonda Lam. Since ancient times, when Buddhism chose its successor, it often did not choose the one with the most bloodline or the reincarnation of the true God, but the one with the most opportunity. Otherwise, how could Master Hirofa, a Japanese, be the one with the most bloodline or the reincarnation of a true God? It was just a coincidence that he was lucky. So, it's the same for Mei Duo." Xueqi let out a cry and said anxiously, "So Mei Duo will really be Bonda Lam in the future?" Li Yundong nodded slightly. That's right. The people of Tibet, the living Buddha, and even the mountain god have all recognized Mei Duo as the successor of Bonda Lam, so she has inherited the power of Bonda Lam. In the future, even if you, the reincarnation of the true god, want to go back and be Bonda Lam again, you won't be able to inherit this power. Xueqi shook her head and said, I don't want this power. What's so good about being locked up? But what about Mei Duo? Is she going to be locked up like this? Li Yundong said with some melancholy, everyone has their own good fortune. This is what she chose. There's nothing we can do. Xueqi was silent. Suddenly, she felt a little guilty. She secretly felt that if she hadn't been selfish, Mei Duo would not have been like this. However, what could she do if she didn't do this? Seeing that the atmosphere was a little heavy, she said with a smile, don't think too much about it. Didn't Sangyong Gyatso, who was chosen as the great Lama of the 6 generations, also abscond on a snowy night? Maybe one day Mei Duo doesn't want to be Bonda Lam anymore, and she will be like her predecessor. When Li Yundong heard what she said, he suddenly felt better. He smiled but didn't say anything. Su Chan, who was standing to one side, was very obedient. She quickly changed the topic and said, Yundong, you said so much just now. Do you want to say that the power of Taoism comes from the continuous transfer of one's own power, but the transfer of this power is based on the cultivation of the yang spirit, while the power of Buddhism comes from the inheritance of the power of the Dharma from generation to generation, but this foundation must be based on the recognition of the living Buddha and the people? Li Yundong glanced at Su Chan and temporarily put his thoughts aside. He nodded and said, Yes, I feel that the power of Bonda Lam seems to be stored on the Kari Holy Mountain. Since ancient times, the power of the people's worship has gathered in the Holy Mountain. When the living Buddha and the people recognized Mei Duo as Bonda Lam, she was qualified to come to the Holy Mountain to inherit this power. Fortunately, Mei Duo inherited this power at that time. Otherwise, I really wouldn't have been able to defeat Su Ling. Xueqi's cultivation time was the shortest, so she knew the least about cultivation sections. She frowned and asked, Who are these 2 guys? Li Yundong said, They said they were from Zengkingism. Zengkingism? Wan Xiuling and Zi Yuan exclaimed in unison. Li Yundong looked at them strangely and asked, What? Do you know them well? Zi Yuan nodded and said, Yes, before I met you, I had some dealings with the people of Zengkingism. Li Yundong asked curiously, Isn't Zengkingism on the decline in mainland China now? There are only some believers of Zengkingism in Fujian. Zi Yuan smiled and said, Zengkingism is not recognized by the current government now, but during the period of the national government, this sect was recognized by the government. At that time it was very active. In the 37th year of the Republic of China, Liao Yipu, the grandnephew of Liao Di, the founder of Zengkingism, founded the Zengkingism Charity Association in Nanjing and filed it with the Ministry of Social Affairs of the national government. At that time, a group of military and political personnel of the Kuomintang joined the association as directors and supervisors. As of 1949, the Zengkingism had set up a total of 205 Taoist halls in 12 provinces and 1 city in the country. It can be said that this sect was second to none in the Chinese Taoist world during the Republic of China. As the saying goes, a centipede dies but does not fall down. It was so glorious at that time, so it's not surprising that some incense has been left behind. As she spoke, Zi Yuan said with some emotion, It's a pity that after the founding of the People's Republic, this sect gradually declined and slowly moved its power to Taiwan, Singapore, Malaysia, and other Southeast Asian places. Especially after the reform and opening up, other Taoist forces began to slowly recover, and it was difficult for the power of Zengkingism to return to the mainland. It only had some inconspicuous henchmen in Fujian. I originally thought that after this sect fell to Southeast Asia, it would never recover. I didn't expect that a Jinshin master of Zengkingism would appear out of thin air. Zi Yuan said to Li Yundong very solemnly, Li Yundong, you must not be careless. A Jinshin master is a powerful force that can change the balance of power of a sect. It can only be encountered by chance. Any sect often only needs a Jinshin master to immediately be able to hold its head up high in the cultivation world. Now that you have become enemies with him, Zengkingism may join him in the future. At that time, the situation will be hard to say. Li Yundong's face was solemn. You're right. Even if he doesn't come to make trouble for me, I will. Su Chan also said with a smile, "That's right. Now we have the 1,000-year-old snow lotus and half of the Dun Jindan. I believe that it won't be long before you become a Jinshin master." Yundong. Hearing Su Chan's innocent words, Li Yundong immediately laughed, pinched the little girl's nose, and said, "What were you doing when I came in just now? Why was the atmosphere so solemn?" Only then did Su Chan seem to remember something. She quickly ran to the tea table, picked up a few pieces of paper, handed them to Li Yundong, and said, "If you hadn't mentioned it, I would have almost forgotten. Yundong, look." Li Yundong took the invitation and looked at it. He was stunned. He saw 3 big words written in a murderous manner on the invitation in his hand. Letter of challenge. Someone asked me, "Tang Tang, are the historical allusions written in your book true?" It can't be true, can it? Well, I can only say it again. Except for the Linggong sect where Zi Yuan is, which is fake and there is no such sect in history, everything else is historical facts, including the Zenkingism in today's chapter. In history, the Zenkingism was indeed glorious during the period of the national government, far above the Jingyi school. In addition, I can say that as long as I dare to write in the form of allusions, there must be ancient books to check and historical facts to prove it, so there is no need to doubt it anymore. In addition, there is no need to worry about these things. There are some things that exist if you believe it, and don't believe it, right? Chapter 563. When Li Yundong saw the 3 letters of challenge in front of him, his heart suddenly trembled. He quietly took the letter of challenge and opened the first one to take a look. His face suddenly froze. He frowned and did not say anything. Go to the internet. The first letter of challenge belonged to no sect, and it was signed by a very strange name. The words were sharp and mean, and the words were sharp and cunning, provoking Li Yundong in every way. It also wrote down the place and time. Li Yundong only glanced at it and threw it aside, snorting disdainfully. Then Li Yundong opened the second letter. This time, Li Yundong saw that there were only a few big words written in ink on the letter of challenge. Those who kill will be killed. It was signed by Zhang Huashui. Li Yundong looked surprised and puzzled, as if he had seen something incredible. He didn't understand why someone would send him such a letter of challenge without writing down the place and time. He hadn't offended this person at all. Li Yundong shook his head secretly and opened the third letter of challenge. He saw that the third letter of challenge was made like an exquisite invitation. It was sprinkled with gold powder and emitted a faint fragrance. As soon as the letter was opened, a row of neat traditional script jumped into his eyes. The handwriting was beautiful, as if it had been written by a woman, revealing a sense of elegance. Before Li Yundong had time to read it, he thought it was strange. Did I offend some female cultivator in the cultivation world? Why did a woman also send me a letter of challenge? But when Li Yundong looked down, he saw that it was written in a genteel manner. Although I live in the Oakwood of Mount Koya and live in seclusion for a long time, I still heard of the invincible reputation of Zhenren. I also learned that Zhenren defeated my beloved disciple, Tachibana Wakako. I was very surprised. Since ancient times, the cultivation world of China and Japan has been separated by a strip of water. Suddenly, I heard that there was another great cultivator in our East Asian world, and I was shocked by Zhenren's outstanding power. I really yearn for it. I hope that Zhenren will take the time to go to Mount Koya. I will welcome you and enjoy the flowers and talk about the moon. Isn't it great? At that time, you and I will have a showdown under the cherry blossoms. It will definitely be a grand event that will be passed down through the ages. Li Yundong saw that although these words were written politely, there was a hidden meaning between the lines. He suddenly raised his eyebrows and snorted. He raised his head and looked at Zi Yuan and the others. Have you all seen these 3 letters of challenge? Zi Yuan, Su Chan, Zhou Qin, and the others all nodded. Li Yundong pondered for a while and asked, "Who sent it?" The first one was suddenly thrown into our living room, and when it first appeared, it was as if an invisible person had slipped in through the crack of the door. Then, it slowly floated onto the table right in front of our eyes. Su Chan said, rushing to the front of the room, Su Chan said. Zhou Qin said disdainfully, "You still want to show off after sending me a letter of challenge? Humph, you really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth." Li Yundong nodded and asked, "What about the second one? I don't have any enmity with Zhang Huashui of Qingqing sect, do I?" Could it be that Zhang Xueqi was seriously injured by Xinxiu and died when he went back? But what does this have to do with me? Zi Yuan's face was also full of confusion. The second letter of challenge was sent by a Taoist priest of Qingqing sect 2 days ago. At that time, this Taoist priest showed extreme hostility towards us. Even I don't know why. At this time, the foxes all shouted with a common hatred. Leader, the people of Qingqing sect are too heartless. You obviously repay evil with good. But they repay evil with good. How can there be such a thing in the world? You must teach them a good lesson. At this time, Su Chan wanted to say something but stopped. She blinked her eyes, looked at Li Yundong, and then looked at the excited foxes. Her heart was full of struggle and hesitation. The girl had always been unable to understand why her master didn't let her tell Li Yundong about Mount Qingqing. While she was struggling in her heart, Li Yundong asked again. Was the third letter of challenge sent by Xinyan Tantrism in Japan? When was it sent here? Who sent it? As soon as he finished asking this question, Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin looked at each other. Zhou Qin said with a look of shame, I'm sorry, master. We don't know. This letter of challenge suddenly appeared on the table. None of us knows how it appeared. Li Yundong was shocked. Zi Yuan, you don't know either? Zi Yuan shook her head helplessly. I don't know. But it should be a trick used by Xinyan Tantrism to show off. Li Yundong's heart trembled. He knew that Zi Yuan was also a top master in the Yongxin phase. Although she was not as good as him in terms of fighting, her realm was almost the same. Moreover, she cultivated the qi-nourishing kung fu of the Xianmen sect. Anyone whose cultivation was lower than hers, or even slightly higher than hers, could easily be detected within 10 meters of her. However, the other party could sneak into his house without Zi Yuan noticing, put down the letter, and leave safely. This in itself was a kind of provocation. The other party could come and go freely in his own nest. This showed that the other party must be a Jinshin master above the Yongxin phase, at least equivalent to a Jinshin master. Moreover, Xinyan Tantrism was one of the most important sects in Japan, and its status was equivalent to that of Zhengyi school in China. As the successor of Xinyan Tantrism, Tachibana Wakako's master must be an important figure. It was impossible for her to take the risk to send this letter of challenge in person. It must have been a subordinate. But a subordinate of Xinyan Tantrism had the strength of a Jinshin master, which was really terrible. How powerful was Tachibana Wakako's master? Was he a legendary master of thunder retribution? Li Yundong suddenly felt that the forces around him and his own strength were still a little too weak. Compared with the sects that had really emerged, there was still a long way to go. Thinking of this, Li Yundong pondered for a while and frowned, as if he was thinking about something. After thinking for a while, he asked Su Chan, "Where is your master?" Su Chan shook her head and said, "I don't know. I haven't seen her in the past 2 days. I'm also looking for her." Li Yundong pursed his lips tightly. He thought for a while and looked around. He saw that Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, Ruan Hongling, and the big foxes of the Fox Zen school were all looking at him eagerly, waiting for him to make a decision. Li Yundong made a prompt decision. He said flatly, "Although we are famous in the Taoist assembly, in fact, we didn't get any benefits at all. We just showed a little bit of useless limelight, but it attracted the coveting of some sections. As the saying goes, the bird that sticks out will be shot. Now that we are in such a limelight, we should be more careful and continue to strengthen ourselves." Listening to this, Zi Yuan suddenly interrupted and asked, "Li Yundong, are you going to find Wang Jinyuan?" Li Yundong said with a determined expression, "What does it mean that the masters of Xinyan Tantrism can easily enter our home? It means that the defense of our nest is useless. Today, he can bring a polite letter of challenge, and tomorrow, he can bring powerful magical weapons to burn, kill, and loot. I absolutely can't tolerate such a situation, so even if Wang Jinyuan has a conspiracy, I have to go." Zi Yuan nodded and said carefully, "You don't have to worry about this. The refining process of Diuanjindan is not as long as you think. As long as the place is chosen well, it will only take 2 days at most. When you give him the 1,000-year-old snow lotus, you can ask to watch from the side until the elixir comes out." Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "I know, but..." Before he could finish his words, he suddenly heard a knock at the door. A clear female voice rang out at the door. "Is Zhenrenli home?" Hearing this voice, Everyone immediately looked at the door curiously. Su-chan quickly walked to the door and opened it. Suddenly, she saw a girl with a plain appearance but a graceful figure, and her eyebrows were full of pride standing at the door. It was Lin Xueqi, who had displayed the amazing skill of Phoenix 3 nods in the Dongwu tea art competition. Su-chan was stunned and couldn't help asking, "It's you? What are you doing here?" Lin Xueqi glanced at her as if she didn't care to talk to her at all. She snorted and said, "Did your family buy this land? Can't I come?" Seeing that she was being rude, Su-chan retorted bluntly, "Cats and dogs can come, but you can't." Lin Xueqi raised her eyebrows, and a flash of anger flashed in her eyes, but she quickly suppressed it. Her eyes swept over Su-chan's shoulder and looked directly at Li Yundong in the living room. She said loudly, "Zhenren Li, is this how you treat your guests?" At this time, Li Yundong also recognized her voice. He walked to the door and looked at her in surprise. "It's you? What's the matter?" Seeing Li Yundong coming over, Su-chan made a face at Lin Xueqi and then stepped aside. When Lin Xueqi saw Li Yundong coming over, there was a trace of eagerness in her eyes to challenge him. Especially now that Li Yundong was in the limelight, which was unparalleled in the world. Who in the cultivation world didn't know Li Yundong's name? Even if she couldn't beat him, if she could make him suffer a loss, she would immediately become famous in the future. But when Lin Xueqi looked at Li Yundong carefully, she saw that his temperament at this time had changed dramatically from when she had met him before. In the past, Li Yundong had been high-spirited and heroic. Although his whole body was blooming with a dazzling light, after Lin Xueqi went back and learned from the painful experience, she found that Li Yundong was not invincible. Especially after she went back to cultivate hard, her cultivation had greatly improved. When she was ready to come out and take revenge, she suddenly found that Li Yundong's previous sharp aura had been completely restrained. It was like the sea. Although there were no stormy waves in the past, the calm sea was full of awe-inspiring vastness, making people unable to figure out how deep and how strong he was. Lin Xueqi was shocked by Li Yundong's temperament for a moment. She looked at him blankly, as if she couldn't believe that he had made such rapid progress after not seeing him for a while. No wonder all the cultivators who have participated in the Taoist assembly in the cultivation world call him Invincible Li. Lin Xueqi said in surprise in her heart. It turns out that it wasn't a lie. Li Yundong saw that her eyes were full of hostility at first, but this hostility soon dissipated. He asked curiously, "Zhenren Lin, what can I do for you?" Although Lin Xueqi was secretly shocked by Li Yundong's cultivation, she still said unforgiving, "Can't I come if I have nothing to do?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "As the saying goes, one doesn't come to the temple for no reason. I don't have any relationship with you and your master, so if you have anything to say, you might as well say it, okay?" When Lin Xueqi had met Li Yundong in the past, as soon as she provoked him with words, he would immediately refute her. But at this time, Li Yundong was calm and didn't seem to be angry at all. She couldn't help but be amazed in her heart. Lin Xueqi seemed to have gotten to know Li Yundong again. She looked at him and said, "Well, I just came to pass a message to you." Li Yundong asked, "What message?" Lin Xueqi looked at Su-chan, who was next to Li Yundong, and Ziyuan and the others behind him with a doubtful gaze. She kept her mouth shut and didn't speak. Li Yundong knew what she was thinking, so he said with a smile, "We are all on the same side. If you have anything to say, you can say it directly." Lin Xueqing's eyes were still full of suspicion as she glanced at Su-chan and the others. Seeing that Li Yundong showed no signs of giving in, she snorted and said, "Master Wan said that if you find the 1,000-year-old snow lotus, you can go to the Pine Valley cottage of Mount Huangshan to find him." Li Yundong was shocked. "Master Wan? Did Wan Zhenyuan ask you to come? How did he know that I had the 1,000-year-old snow lotus?" Lin Xueqing laughed, then turned around and left. She giggled and said, "Do you want to know? You'll know when you go to the Pine Valley cottage of Mount Huangshan." Chapter 564. Li Yunyang saw that Lin Xueqing had left without hesitation. She had come and gone in a hurry, which was very much in line with her character. Before he had time to ask some questions, she had already disappeared in front of his eyes. Go to the internet. 7K. Oath M. Li Yundong couldn't help but shake his head. He lowered his head and pondered. After pondering for a while, he raised his head and saw that everyone was looking at him with bated breath. They didn't even dare to breathe too loudly for fear of disturbing his train of thought. Zi Yuan, who was standing to one side, also asked with concern, "What's wrong? What did you think of?" Li Yundong shook his head and said with a frown, "I'm very curious. How did Wang Zhenyuan know that I got the 1,000-year-old snow lotus? You know, as soon as I entered the house, he already knew that I had the 1,000-year-old snow lotus and that I had gone home before I even sat down. This is really too strange." Zi Yuan thought for a moment and said, "In fact, you don't have to worry so much. The power of external alchemy is far beyond our imagination." Before the 10 years of turmoil, the leader of external alchemy, Tang Buzhou, the master of the Gazao sect, had already begun to plan to transfer assets to the distant western part of Xinjiang and the southeast coastal provinces. At that time, Mount Gazao of the Gazao sect had almost become an empty ancestral court. In particular, after the master of the Gazao sect moved to Tianshan in Xinjiang, he later accepted a Xinjiang man named Shiri Hong as his disciple and passed on all his cultivation methods to him. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. He suddenly asked, "Is Shiri Hong?" Zi Yuan nodded. "Yes, it's Wang Zhenyuan." In the future, Wang Zhenyuan was greatly influenced by his master and was greatly influenced by the Han people. He usually regarded himself as a Han and didn't think of himself as a Xinjiang man at all. He was thinking about how to revive the Gazao sect and the external alchemy. He had been scheming for more than 10 years. He did not even hesitate to empty his ancestral court and chose to spread the sect's influence throughout the country in the form of a company group. Therefore, he had laid down his foundation in various places. Even Tibet was no exception. So, it's not surprising that he knows your whereabouts. Li Yundong took a deep breath, shook his head, and said, "I know that Wang Zhenyuan is an ambitious man, but I didn't expect that his plan was so deep and long-term. Terrifying, truly terrifying. But why did he send Lin Xueqi? Does the Pine Valley cottage belong to external alchemy?" At this time, Yuan Hongling rushed to say, "Of course, the Pine Valley cottage specializes in the tea business. Lin Xueqi and Zhong Qingsong are involved in the tea business of Mount Huangshan. 80% of the cultivation sects in the world that deal in tea and medicinal materials are controlled by external alchemy, and the Gazao sect alone controls 90% of the resources and channels of external alchemy." Li Yundong's expression was grave. "So that's how it is. But I think this external alchemy sect is more important than the Gazao sect. I saw that they didn't have any masters at the Taoist assembly, so I couldn't help but look at them a little more, but I didn't know that their economic strength was actually so strong." Zi Yuan smiled and said, "The lack of masters has always been a pain in the hearts of external alchemy and Wang Zhenyuan. That's why Wang Zhenyuan wants to refine the Diyuan Jindan at all costs. As long as there is a Diyuan Jindan, the Gazao sect can have a Jinshin master. Once there is a Jinshin master, with the Gazao sect's almost absolute economic strength in the cultivation world, they can quickly overturn the structure of the entire cultivation world." Li Yundong couldn't help but sigh and say, "It seems that wealth is not only reflected in cultivation, but also in the struggle for hegemony among the various sects in the cultivation world." Su Chan took Li Yundong's arm and interjected, "We have money now. We're not poor anymore." The girl's naive words immediately made Li Yundong laugh. He touched the girl's head dotingly and said with a smile, "Silly girl, our money is nothing in his eyes." Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said, "Don't belittle yourself. Now that the 1,000-year snow lotus is in our hands, it's priceless. Once you want to sell it, you can immediately become a billionaire." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Are you kidding me? How could I be willing to sell such a treasure?" Zi Yuan smiled and said, "That's true. However, Wang Zhenyuan didn't send someone earlier or later, but at this time. This shows that Wang Zhenyuan is also afraid that you won't cooperate with him after you get the 1,000-year snow lotus, so he sent someone to tell you to go to Mount Huangshan. I think there's more warning than conspiracy. Judging from the situation of Wang Zhenyuan and the Gazao sect, they should be more eager for the Diyuan Jindan than you are." Li Yundong nodded and said, "I agree with you. However, Wang Zhenyuan is really measuring the heart of a gentleman. Is he afraid that I will run away? Besides him, who else in the world can refine the Diyuan Jindan?" At this time, Zhou Qin, who had been silent all this time, suddenly asked, "Master, have you decided to go to Mount Huangshan?" Li Yundong nodded and said, yes. Moreover, this kind of thing can't be delayed. I'll go now. Xueqi immediately said, Master, I want to go with you. As soon as she finished speaking, Su Chan, who was next to her, also shouted, I want to go too. As soon as the girl shouted, the foxes also shouted, Leader, we also want to go to Mount Huangshan to have a look. Yes, Mount Huangshan is the most mysterious mountain in the world. We have never been there before. Leader, please take us to have a look. For a moment, the group of foxes in the living room was noisy. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He pretended to be angry and glared at Xueqi and Su Chan, shouting, Do you think I'm going on a sightseeing tour? Do you know how many people are watching us now? Xueqi and Su Chan couldn't help looking at each other, feeling wronged in their hearts. I'm not going to play. It's the foxes who want to play. What does it have to do with me? But they also knew that Li Yundong was making an example out of them, so they obediently lowered their heads and didn't speak. When the foxes saw that Xueqi and Su Chan had been scolded, they immediately shrank their heads and stopped making noise. Seeing that he had finally suppressed the group of foxes, Li Yundong turned to Ziyuan and said, Ziyuan, I'm going to Mount Huangshan now. Please take care of the family. Ziyuan asked worriedly, Are you going alone? Why don't you rest for a while? It's been less than 10 minutes since you entered the door. Li Yundong shook his head and said, Forget it. I really can't rest assured that I have so many treasures with me. In order to avoid any accidents, I'd better go as soon as possible. You don't have to follow me. It's more convenient for me to go alone. Seeing that Li Yundong's attitude was firm, Ziyuan didn't force him. She said softly, Then you go and come back early. Just be careful. Li Yundong smiled and nodded at her. Ruan Hongling, who was standing to one side, saw that when Ziyuan spoke, there was a gentleness and concern that was rarely shown on her face. Especially when she talked to Li Yundong, it was as if a husband who was about to leave home was taking care of his wife, who was staying at home, and the wife was also concerned about her husband who was about to travel far away. The atmosphere between the two of them was a little strange, but they didn't notice it at all. Ruan Hongling chuckled in her heart. She wanted to make her Shiji and Li Yundong fall in love, so she began to plan in her heart. But just as she was thinking, she saw that as soon as Li Yundong went out, she heard a shout outside the door, Master, Master. Ruan Hongling curiously went to the door with Su Chan and the others and looked out. They saw that John, Chris and Alba had somehow found out their address and had come to the door. As soon as the three foreigners saw Li Yundong, they knelt on the ground in a row and shouted. Li Yundong suddenly felt a headache when he saw that he had met these three guys who were pestering him to be his disciple. He said with a wry smile, What are you doing here? How did you know that I live here? John rushed to say, Master, we sincerely want to be your disciple. Naturally, we can ask. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and he immediately looked at Xueqi. Xueqi suddenly smiled awkwardly and said, Fengna called me yesterday, and I was too embarrassed not to tell her. Li Yundong shook his head secretly. He bent down and helped John, Chris, and Alba up. He shook his head and said, No, I can't accept you as my disciples now. Although John was bigger than Li Yundong, he only felt that as soon as Li Yundong reached out his hand, he couldn't help standing up. He asked anxiously, Master, why? Aren't we sincere enough? Chris also said to Li Yundong seriously, We have done what you asked us to do. Why are you still not willing to accept us as disciples? Is race really so important? Although Alba didn't understand what they were saying, she could tell that her companions were begging Li Yundong. She also nodded vigorously, then kept pointing at herself and shouting the Chinese name she had just given herself in poor Chinese. Zhao Jing, it's me, Zhao Jing. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but he couldn't tell them that he was going to Mount Huangshan now, so he couldn't accept them as disciples. Moreover, he still hadn't decided whether to accept these three foreigners as disciples or not. Li Yundong thought for a moment and said vaguely, Not now. It's not the right time. Chris hurriedly asked. Then when is the time? Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, When I think it's the right time. As he said this, he smiled apologetically at Chris and the others. I'm sorry, I have something urgent to do. I'll leave first. After that he left quickly. John, Chris, and the others were anxious and hurriedly chased after him. However, after a few meters, they saw Li Yundong turn a corner and immediately disappear. Chris, John, and Alba were instantly disappointed. Alba couldn't help complaining. This damn male chauvinist. Who can give me a gun? I'll shoot him. John was shocked. What did you say? Chris also shook her head and said, Alba, you can't say such things in the future. In the eyes of Chinese people, this is an act of deceiving your master and destroying your ancestors. Alba shrugged her shoulders. I was just saying it casually. Who told this guy to bully us? As they said this, the three foreigners looked at each other and sighed in unison. They frowned and thought, how on earth can we successfully become an apprentice? Chapter 565. Guan Hongling, who was not far away, saw that Li Yundong had refused Chris and the others' offer to be his apprentices. She gloated, but soon she found that Zhou Qin was looking at Chris sympathetically. Guan Hongling's heart suddenly skipped a beat. She found that Zi Yuan was not by her side at this time, so she walked up to Zhou Qin and said in a low voice, Zhou Qin, are you so relieved to let Li Yundong go to Mount Huangshan alone? Zhou Qin didn't doubt her. She sighed and said, I want to go too, but Master won't let me. What can I do? Guan Hongling winked at Zhou Qin, then glanced at Chris, who was not far away, and blinked. Go to Mount Huangshan. Zhou Qin was also an extremely smart woman. She immediately understood and said, You mean? Guan Hongling immediately made a shushing gesture and then blinked her eyes. Zhou Qin's eyes lit up, and she cast a grateful look at Guan Hongling. She immediately took 2 steps forward, but halfway through, she hesitated again. She turned back and whispered to Guan Hongling, No, if Master finds out, he will definitely blame me. Guan Hongling laughed and secretly pointed at Su Chan. If you take her with you, will Li Yundong blame you? Zhou Qin was stunned for a moment, and then she was overjoyed. She smiled and nodded to Guan Hongling, then walked up to Su Chan and said softly, Su Chan, do you want to go to Mount Huangshan? Su Chan was looking in the direction of Li Yundong's departure, frowning and at a loss for what to do. She had waited so long for Li Yundong to come back, but who would have thought that he would leave in less than 10 minutes? This really made her so worried that her heart was broken. When the girl heard Zhou Qin's words, her eyes suddenly lit up. I want to go. Sister Zhou Qin, do you want to go too? But the girl's face soon fell again and she said, But Yundong knows that I'm not obedient. He will scold me. Zhou Qin pointed at Chris and the others and said in a low voice, Let's say that these foreigners insisted on going to Master, and then we tried everything to persuade them, but it was useless. We were afraid that something would happen to them, so we had to accompany them to find Master. What do you think? Su Chan was overjoyed and quickly nodded, but she immediately frowned and asked, But, how did they know where Master went? Zhou Qin hesitated for a moment, but she quickly pointed to Guan Hongling next to her and said, Let's just say that she let it slip. Su Chan was shocked. I don't think that's a good idea. Guan Hongling, who was at the side, also heard it. She was shocked. Why did I let it slip? Zhou Qin turned her head, looked at Guan Hongling with a faint smile, and said, It was your idea. What's wrong with you suffering a loss? Guan Hongling saw that there was a hidden meaning in Zhou Qin's words. She smiled guiltily, but soon she braced herself and said, Well, it's a slip of the tongue. However, you must not tell anyone about my idea. Otherwise, I will not admit that I spilled the beans. Zhou Qin was overjoyed. It's a deal. However, Su Chan asked suspiciously, What are you talking about? Zhou Qin had always been decisive. She said to Su Chan, Don't worry about it now. Master's young spirit is flying very fast. We won't be able to catch up with him in a while. Are you going or not? Just say it. Su Chan hesitated for a long time. She really missed Li Jiandong very much, and she was worried about the safety of her sweetheart. She gritted her teeth and said, Okay, let's go. Zhou Qin was overjoyed. She quickly walked over to Chris and said in English, Chris, Master is actually testing you. If you want to be apprenticed in China, you have to go through many tests. If you really want to be apprenticed, you should follow my master. Wherever he goes, you will go. Chris's face lit up with joy and she quickly asked, Then where did he go? Zhou Qin suddenly smiled, feeling proud of the success of her plan. She smiled and said, "He went to Mount Huangshan, but if you want to go, I'm afraid you won't be able to find him. Su-chan and I will take you there." John and Chris were both overjoyed. Only Alba muttered a few words in a low voice, but no one heard what she said. Ruan Hongling, who was standing to one side, saw that Xueqi, Su-chan, and Chris had finished their discussion, and quickly chased after Li Jiandong. Seeing that everyone was far away and that they had been gone for a long time, she laughed proudly and said, "Even if you are a living fox spirit and a clever young lady, you still have to fall into my trap. Haha, you have fallen into my trap." At this time, Zi Yuan, who was in the room, heard her laughter. She came out curiously and asked, "What are you laughing at outside?" Ruan Hongling proudly told her about her plan and then said, "Shiji Zi Yuan, I see that you and Li Jiandong are always flirting with each other. It's obvious that you like each other very much, but you just refuse to say it. If I hadn't helped you like this, when would you have been able to break through this layer of window paper?" However, Zi Yuan's reaction was unexpected. She said in shock and anger, "Are you helping me?" Ruan Hongling asked curiously, "Isn't it? How dare you say that you don't like Li Jiandong?" "Humph, Li Jiandong is so loyal to Su-chan. Last time she caused such a big trouble, Li Jiandong didn't blame her. Humph, this time, with Su-chan's character, she will definitely cause trouble again. When that time comes, I will see that she causes trouble again and again. One day, Li Jiandong will be annoyed by her. At that time, Shiji Zi Yuan Yub." Before she could finish speaking, Zi Yuan suddenly flew into a rage. ****. She couldn't help but raise her hand to slap Ruan Hongling, but when her hand was about to hit Ruan Hongling's face, she stopped abruptly. Zi Yuan quickly glanced at the room and quickly closed the door. She suppressed her anger and scolded, "Are you helping me? How could you do such a thing? Haven't you heard that it's better to tear down 10 temples than to ruin a marriage? You disappoint me so much." After that, Zi Yuan stomped her feet and rushed out. Ruan Hongling was frightened by Zi Yuan's rare anger. She subconsciously covered her face. After Zi Yuan left, she subconsciously asked, "Shiji, where are you going?" Zi Yuan turned her head and said angrily, "Do you know how many people are watching us now? I'm going to get them back." As she spoke, she raised her hand and pointed at Ruan Hongling with hatred. She glared at her and said, "If anything happens to them, I won't spare you." Ruan Hongling watched Zi Yuan leave in a daze. She felt both wronged and sad in her heart. She couldn't help crying for a moment. She cried, "If it weren't for you, would I have to be the bad guy? It's clear that I like him so much that I even dream of his name at night, but I just refuse to say it. I'm the bad guy. It's fine if you don't think about me, but you still scold me like this." The more Ruan Hongling thought about it, the more she couldn't get over it. She turned her head and rushed to her room opposite the door, crying loudly. In Zi Yuan's opinion, Su-chan and Xueqi wouldn't be able to go far with 3 foreigners who had no cultivation skills at all. Therefore, after she rushed out of the area, she immediately picked a place where there was no one and quickly flew to the top of a tall building. She looked around from a high vantage point. Zi Yuan looked for a while and saw the figures of Su-chan, Xueqi, Chris, and the others suddenly flash past at the corner of the street. She immediately shouted, "Su-chan, Xueqi." After that, she immediately chased after them. Su-chan's ears were sharp, and she immediately heard Zi Yuan's shout. Her heart tightened and she quickly said to Xueqi, "Oh no, Sister Zi Yuan must have found out and come to take us back." Xueqi also frowned and said, "Zi Yuan is too steady. She definitely won't agree to let us go. What should we do?" When Su-chan saw Xueqi looking at her, she rolled her eyes and immediately looked at Chris and Hardedef. Chris was quite shrewd. Although she didn't know what was going on, she subconsciously didn't answer. Alba didn't understand what they were talking about, so she kept her mouth shut. Only Hardedef said casually, "Of course, we should avoid her. Otherwise, how can we find Master?" Xueqi and Su-chan were delighted at the same time and said with a smile, "That's what you said." The two of them took Chris, Hardedef, and Alba to a corner. Su-chan quickly put up a Nyan seal to hide their figures. As soon as Zi Yuan arrived at the place where they had appeared, she saw that there was no trace of them. She was shocked and hurriedly looked around. However, she was originally a beautiful woman who was as beautiful as a fairy. As soon as she appeared on the street, she immediately attracted the attention of passers-by. Some drivers even saw Zi Yuan at a glance and were immediately shocked by her amazing beauty. For a time, there were many car accidents on the road, and there were constant rear-end collisions. When Zi Yuan saw such a thing happening on the street, she couldn't help but feel a headache and become more and more anxious. Last time, Zhonyan Tantrism had secretly sent a letter of challenge under her nose, which had already made her feel a little ashamed. Now Li Jiandong had entrusted these people to her. If anything happened to Zhou Qin and Su Chan, how could she face Li Jiandong? Zi Yuan also didn't want to shout in the street. She quickly calculated in her heart and thought to herself, could it be that they are hiding from me? Zi Yuan deliberately stomped her feet in the street and left quickly. She hid in a corner and secretly looked around. Seeing that Zi Yuan had left, Chris said, she's gone. Can we go out? However, Su Chan raised a finger and made a silent gesture. Shoo, Sister Zi Yuan is very smart. She won't be so stupid. She must be waiting for us somewhere. Don't worry. Anyway, we know that Yundong has gone to Mount Huangshan. When the time comes, we can go to Pine Valley Cottage and find him eventually. Hearing her words, Chris closed her mouth and did not speak. They waited for a long time until Alba kept complaining and Hardadef became very impatient. At this time, Zi Yuan flashed out of the corner in disappointment. While the people on the street were not paying attention, she instantly turned into a green light and flew into the air, flying in the direction of Mount Huangshan. At this time, Su Chan breathed a sigh of relief and said proudly, well, we can go now. Follow Sister Zi Yuan. However, Zhou Qin sighed and said, we've been delayed for so long. I don't know if we can catch up. Forget it, let's go. Now that the car is moving fast, it is estimated that we will be able to reach Mount Huangshan in Anhui in a few hours. After the discussion, they stopped a car together and went to Mount Huangshan with Li Jiandong, Zi Yuan, and the others one after the other. But what they didn't know was that because of Wan Hongling's spur of the moment instigation, the famous Earth 3 immortals in the cultivation world, known as Fairy Immortal, Human Immortal, and Fox Immortal had been created. Similarly, Chris, Hardadef and Alba, the three foreigners who wanted to be apprentices with different purposes, would completely change their fates and go their separate ways from then on. Chapter 566. Not long after Li Yundong flew in the air, he found that Lin Xueqi was waiting for him in the air. Her face was full of pride, as if she knew that Li Yundong would definitely follow her. Go to the internet. 7K. Oath M. Seeing Li Yundong flying closer, Lin Xueqi was about to speak proudly, but she saw that Li Yundong kept flying past her, which made her swallow her words. She had no choice but to follow Li Yundong to Mount Huangshan angrily. After flying for a long time, they finally arrived near Mount Huangshan. When Li Yundong landed, he saw that he was in a magnificent mountain range. There were thousands of peaks and valleys, strange pines everywhere, strange rocks piercing the sky, and dense clouds. Li Yundong looked around and felt that as far as his eyes could see, there were pine trees everywhere. These pine trees used stone as soil and took root in the cracks of the giant rocks. From a distance, he could see that the pine trees were green and dense all over the mountains. Their trunks and branches were twisted, and they were in a variety of shapes. Some were tall and straight against the shore, some were standing on the peak, some were hanging upside down on the precipice, some were flat like a lid, and some were sharp like a sword. Some followed the cliffs and ravines and went around the rocks. Some went through the cracks of the caves and broke out of the rocks. Suddenly hanging, suddenly horizontal, suddenly lying down, suddenly rising. It was truly a scene where there was no tree, no pine, no stone, no pine, no pine. Li Yundong felt as if he was in a paradise, a fairyland on earth. The air around him was filled with the spiritual qi of heaven and earth, which was extremely rich and refreshing. Sure enough, when one returns from Mount Huangshan, one doesn't look at the mountain. Li Yundong couldn't help but look at the beautiful scenery around him and sigh from the bottom of his heart. At this time, Lin Xueqi also landed beside him and said proudly, of course. Why don't you look at where you are? This is Tiandu Peak, the highest peak of Mount Huangshan. Haven't you heard of the saying, no matter how many people come from Mount Huangshan, they will be surprised when they see Tiandu? Li Yunyang smiled slightly, as if he had forgotten about the Dun Jindan for a moment. He looked around with great emotion and thought to himself, If I can live here with Chon'er in the future, cultivate the Tao together, and travel together, it will be a matter of envy for immortals and lovebirds. While Li Yunyang was sighing, he saw Lin Xueqi running quickly toward Tiandu Peak. She was like a spirit monkey, jumping and running quickly in the woods. In the blink of an eye, she had run halfway up the mountain. Li Yundong quickly shouted, "Hey, where are you going?" Li Yundong's shout spread throughout the valley, causing echoes to echo. Lin Xueqi stopped, turned around and shouted, "Go and find Master Wan." Li Yundong asked curiously, "Isn't it at Pine Valley Cottage?" Lin Xueqi laughed and said, "Who said we're in Pine Valley Cottage?" "On Celestial Capital Peak. Come with me." Li Yundong was full of doubts, but he quickly followed. Li Yundong jumped up and quickly climbed up the hillside. When he reached the top of Celestial Capital Peak, he looked around and saw a vast sea of clouds around him. The clouds and mountains were connected, and the rivers were in a line. Looking down at the mountains, he saw thousands of peaks competing for beauty. Only the mountain under his feet pierced through the sky, looking down at the peaks, magnificent and magnificent. When Li Yundong looked down, he saw that the cableway on the mountain was winding like a long gray snake around the mountain, coiling and circling. When the mountain wind blew, the cableway would shake and make a thrilling sound. It was extremely thrilling. Lin Xueqi saw that Li Yundong's eyes were full of admiration and appreciation. She was proud of herself, but suddenly an idea came to her mind and she said, "By the way, I'll give you a test. Make a couplet with this scene in front of you. You should have the words sea, sky, mountain, and peak. What do you think?" Although Li Yundong didn't know why Lin Xueqi suddenly wanted to test him, when he looked at the magnificent scenery around him, he felt a heroic feeling in his chest, as if he wanted to compete with God. He felt that although the world was big, people could defeat it. This was the biggest difference between Taoists and Buddhists. Buddhists paid attention to knowing their destiny and being obedient, and people could not win against heaven, while Taoists paid attention to going against heaven, and people could win against heaven. A burst of fierce yuanyang qi seemed to be surging in Li Yundong's chest, like a torrent spewing out. He immediately blurted out, "When the sea is boundless, the sky is the shore. When the mountain reaches the top, I am the peak." When Li Yundong recited this couplet, his voice was loud and his breath was long. It was as if countless bells were ringing in the mountains at the same time, and it was also like continuous waves, magnificent and layered. It was transmitted far away, echoing in the valley and the sea of clouds. Anyone who heard it would feel their blood boiling and their hearts opening up. Although Lin Xueqi was a woman, she knew that Li Yundong had borrowed Lin Zexu's couplet to answer the question. But when she heard this sentence, she couldn't help but be shocked by Li Yundong's passion. For a moment, she marveled in her heart. This person is so broad-minded and courageous. No wonder people have given him the nickname Invincible Li after only half a year of cultivation. It seems that I really underestimated him before. Just based on his spirit when he said these words, it is enough to conclude that this person will definitely be a great grandmaster and a great Zhenren in the future. She looked at Li Yundong and was secretly shocked, but she suddenly heard a laugh not far away. "What a good when the mountain reaches the top, I am the peak." Li Yundong and Lin Xueqi turned their heads and saw Wan Jinyuan, who was wearing a Taoist robe and holding a horsetail whisk, walking toward them with a laugh. As soon as Li Yundong saw Wan Jinyuan, he turned around, bowed to him, and said with a smile, "Master Wan." Lin Xueqi bowed to Wan Jinyuan and said casually, "Uncle Wan, I've brought him to you. Is there anything else I can do for you?" Wan Jinyuan stroked his beard and said to Lin Xueqi with a smile, "Qing, it's all right. Go and find your master. I want to have a word with Zhenren Li." Lin Xueqi responded and quickly left. But after a few steps, she looked back at Li Yundong with a strange look in her eyes. She quickly glanced at Wan Jinyuan again, as if she wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Wan Jinyuan smiled and said, "Qing, is there anything else?" Lin Xueqi hesitated for a moment, then shook her head and said, "Nothing. I'm leaving, uncle." Then she left. After seeing her go far away, Li Yundong smiled and said to Wan Jinyuan, "Master Wan, how have you been?" Wan Jinyuan laughed and said, "You're welcome, Zhenren Li. Recently, I've been busy preparing to refine the Dun Jindan, so I can't get away from it. I had to ask Qing to invite you here for a chat." Qing Tsong has been spoiled by her master. If she has been disrespectful in any way, I would like to apologize to you first. Li Yundong waved his hand and said, "It's nothing. But I'm very curious about why you're here, Zhenren. Why aren't you on Mount Gazao?" Wang Jinyuan laughed and said, "Mount Gazao? I've been robbed twice on Mount Gazao. Wouldn't I be looking for trouble if I were to refine elixirs there?" Li Yundong asked curiously, "Oh? Is there no problem with Mount Huangshan?" Wang Jinyuan smiled and said, "Mount Huangshan has been the holy land of our Taoism since ancient times. In modern times, our Gazao sect has been operating here for a long time. Our power is deeply rooted, and it's difficult for outsiders to enter. Moreover, Tiandu Peak is now in a state of closure, so tourists can't enter. Therefore, there's no need to worry about being disturbed when I refine elixirs here. No one will know that I'm refining the Diyuan Jindan here." Li Yundong looked around with a smile and nodded slightly. "Master Wan, you're really thoughtful. I admire you." Wang Jinyuan laughed and said, "Zhenren Li is really capable. I didn't expect that you would bring back the 1,000-year-old snow lotus so quickly. Now, there's great hope for the refining of the Diyuan Jindan." Li Yundong wanted to ask Wang Jinyuan why he was monitoring him, but after thinking for a moment, he refrained from asking. Instead he asked, "Master Wan, how can I be sure that the Diyuan Jindan will be refined when the time comes?" Seeing that Li Yundong was sensible enough not to mention that he had been monitoring him, Wang Jinyuan breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. He couldn't help but admire Li Yundong's maturity. He smiled and said, "Zhenren Li, you don't have to worry. You can watch and accompany me all the way until the elixirs are refined. I believe that with your ability, you won't be worried that I will swallow the Diyuan Jindan in front of you, will you?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Master Wan, you must be joking." As he spoke, he generously handed over the 1,000-year-old snow lotus wrapped in a white handkerchief and kept the white handkerchief for himself. Wang Jinyuan's eyes lit up when he saw the 1,000-year-old snow lotus. His hands trembled slightly as he reached out and held it up. Then he said in a trembling voice, "Is this the 1,000-year-old snow lotus? Is this the 1,000-year-old snow lotus? Oh my God!" Wang Jinyuan knelt down in the direction of Tianshan Mountain in the west with tears in his eyes and said in a choked voice, "Master, I finally didn't let you down. I finally have the opportunity to refine the Diyuan Jindan in my lifetime." Li Yundong saw that Wang Jinyuan, a middle-aged man in his 40s or 50s, was so excited that he lost his composure at this time. Thinking of some of Wang Jinyuan's life stories that Zi Yuan had told him before, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He said, "Master Wan, if your master knows, he will definitely bless you." Wang Jinyuan held up the 1,000-year-old snow lotus with both hands and kowtowed 3 times respectfully. Then, he got up and wiped his tears with his sleeves. Only then did he laugh and say, "Zhenren Li, I'm sorry. I learned the Tao from my master when I was 10 years old. Although my master's cultivation has reached the sage realm, he has always regretted that he could not see the magic of the Diyuan Jindan with his own eyes in his lifetime. He could not refine the long-lost Diyuan Jindan with his own hands. Now, I have finally realized my master's last wish. Thank you very much for your help, Zhenren Li." Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "I'd like to watch Master Wan refine the elixir." Wang Jinyuan laughed and carefully hid the 1,000-year-old snow lotus. He pointed to a hidden cave not far away and said with a smile, "Look, this is the door of the Immortal's Cave. I've already arranged everything inside. Please come with me." While Li Yundong and Wang Jinyuan were heading for the alchemy cave, Lin Xueqi had already returned to the Pine Valley Cottage, which was located in the north of Mount Huangshan. However, she hadn't expected that there would be 2 unexpected guests in the Pine Valley Cottage at this time. One of them was an old man with a ruddy complexion and a kind smile on his face. He was enthusiastically chatting with his master, Zhong Qingsong. Next to him stood a tall, sexy and fashionable woman. These 2 people were none other than Zhang Yuan and his disciple, Ding Nan. "I came home very late. I still owe everyone an update. I'll make it up tomorrow morning." Chapter 567. When Zhong Qingsong saw Lin Xueqi, he immediately stood up with a smile and said to her enthusiastically, Qing'er, come here quickly. I'll introduce you to a famous cultivator. Watch net. This is the head of the Yin-Yang sect in Mount Wuhua, Zhang Yuan. This is his beloved disciple, LV Fengping. Lin Xueqi and her master rarely traveled in the world. Except for the last time they had participated in the tea art competition, she had almost no contact with outsiders. Therefore, she had developed a solitary, arrogant, and conceited temperament. But even though she rarely went out, she still knew something about Zhang Yuan. She glanced at him and suddenly asked, "Are you Zhang Yuan?" When Zhong Qingsong heard Lin Xueqing's rude words, his face changed and he scolded, "****, how can you say that?" Zhang Yuan stroked his white beard with a smile and said, "It doesn't matter, young people." As he spoke, he took out a jade thumb ring from his bosom and handed it over with a smile. "I came in a hurry, so I didn't bring any decent gifts. Your master and I are best friends, so this is just a small gift. Haha, wear it and play with it." At a glance, Lin Xueqing saw that the jade ring was emerald green and had no flaws. It was obviously a rare treasure. She felt strange in her heart, but she didn't take the jade ring. Instead she asked, "Zhenren Zhang, I heard that your reputation doesn't seem to be very good." Zhang Yuan and Zhong Qingsong's expressions changed at the same time. Zhong Qingsong shouted angrily, "Qing'er, how dare you? Zhenren Zhang is my savior. How can you speak to him like that?" Zhang Yuan's expression changed at first, and a trace of resentment flashed in his eyes. But it disappeared in a flash, and soon his face was full of a kind and magnanimous smile. He stroked his beard and said with a smile, "It doesn't matter. It's normal for some people in this world to misunderstand me." Ding Nan, who was standing to the side, also seized the opportunity and said with a charming smile, "Most rumors are untrustworthy. It's human nature to be jealous of those with talent." Zhong Qingsong quickly said, Yes, Zhenren Zhang's ability is so great that it will naturally arouse the jealousy of others." Seeing this, Lin Xueqing couldn't help but think of some rumors about Li Yundong. She agreed with them in her heart, so she didn't say anything more. However, she didn't take the jade ring either. Instead she asked, "Forget it, let's not talk about this. Jianghu rumors are indeed not credible. However, I can't accept this jade thumb ring. As the saying goes, there's no such thing as an undeserved reward. I'm going to take your things. If you have any requests later, it's fine if Master and I can do it, but if we can't, then it's hard to say. As the saying goes, one's mouth softens when fed, but one's hands are short when taken, isn't that right?" Lin Xueqing was so sharp-tongued that Zhang Yuan's face turned blue and red. Zhong Qingsong was so angry that he pulled her to him and scolded her in a low voice. "Qing'er, what's wrong with you today? Did he take the wrong medicine? Is this how I taught you to treat people?" Zhang Yuan suppressed his anger and waved his hand with a smile. "Brother Zhong, you don't have to teach her a lesson. Your disciple is a straightforward person." "Good, I like this kind of person. However, your disciple is right. I didn't come here for nothing this time. I have something to ask of you." Zhong Qingsong glared at Lin Xueqing, as if he was going to settle accounts with her later. He turned his head and said to Zhang Yuan with a smile, "Zhenren Zhang, if there's anything you need, just tell me. I will definitely do it if I can." Zhang Yuan smiled and said, "I've always heard that you are a good alchemist, and your alchemy skills are only inferior to Wang Yuan, the master of the Gazao sect. You also have a large number of production channels for medicinal materials. My beloved disciple has just finished the Xueqi phase recently and has eaten up all the panaceas she had stored before. So this time, I want to ask you to replenish them." When Zhong Qingsong heard this, he suddenly looked embarrassed. He hesitated for a moment, and Zhang Yuan immediately said, "What's wrong, Brother Zhong? Is there anything you can't do? If there is, just tell me. I will definitely not embarrass you." Zhong Qingsong quickly said with a smile, "To tell you the truth, Zhenren Zhang, recently, all the medicinal materials on hand have been sold out. I don't have any in stock, so I haven't been able to refine any pills. However, I still have a bottle of Shenxiao powder. I don't know if Zhenren Zhang will like it." Zhang Yuan's face was full of astonishment. "You've sold all of them? Brother Zhong, are you kidding me? As far as I know, all the medicinal materials near Mount Huangshan are in your hands. How can you not have any in stock?" Which pharmaceutical factory has such a big appetite to swallow all of your stock in one gulp? Zhong Qingsong shook his head and said, Zhenren Zheng, I really don't have any left. As for who bought it, I can't say. But please believe me, if there is, I will definitely give it to you with both hands. Zhang Yuan was greatly disappointed and shocked. Zhong Qingsong's heart was full of guilt. He tentatively said, Zhenren Zheng, why don't you take my Shenshao powder for now? After a while, I'll definitely bring the refined pills to visit Mount Wuhua. Is that okay? Zhang Yuan thought to himself, Humph, what's the use of a body-strengthening pill like Shenshao powder? Zhong Qingsong must be hiding something from me. Seeing that Zhong Qingsong was unwilling to let go, Zhang Yuan decided to be a good person to the end. He waved his hand, smiled generously and said, Forget it. You can keep it. I'll come back another day. Zhong Qingsong said to him with a guilty face, I'm really sorry to have made you come here in vain, Zhenren Zheng. Zhang Yuan chuckled. Just as he was about to speak, he heard a clear female voice coming from outside the Pine Valley cottage. Abbess Zhong, is Sect Master here? The 4 people in the room were suddenly stunned. They looked outside and saw a beautiful woman in a white dress standing outside. She was slim and graceful, like a fairy. It was Zi Yuan. Why is she here? The same thought flashed through the minds of the 4 people at the same time. Lin Xueqi had some conflicts with Zi Yuan before. When she suddenly saw Zi Yuan, she frowned, walked up, and said loudly, What are you doing here? In the face of Lin Xueqing's rude questioning, Zi Yuan quickly glanced around, as if she was looking for the backs of Su Chan and the others. She said politely and reservedly, Zhenren Lin, I want to ask you something. Lin Xueqing frowned and asked, What is it? Zi Yuan said, Did Li Yundong come to Mount Huangshan with you? Lin Xueqing opened her mouth and blurted out, Yes, what's wrong? Zhong Qingsong, who was standing to one side, suddenly frowned and secretly glared at Lin Xueqing, but Lin Xueqing acted as if she hadn't seen it. Zi Yuan asked again, Then where is Li Yundong now? Is he with Sect Master Wan? Did anyone else come to see him? Lin Xueqing said straightforwardly, No, they'j. Zhong Qingsong immediately interrupted, They're not here. Sect Master lives deep in Mount Gazao. How could he be in Mount Huangshan? I think you must be mistaken, Zi Yuan. Lin Xueqing was stunned, but soon understood that her master didn't want to reveal Wan Zhenyuan's whereabouts. She quickly changed her words and said, Yes, they're not here. Zi Yuan saw that the master and disciple were vague and evasive. It was obvious that they were hiding something. She became suspicious and glanced at Zhang Yuan and Ding Nan again. She saw that although Zhang Yuan was looking at her with a smile on his face, his eyes were full of vigilance. He couldn't help touching his cuffs, as if he was eager to take action as long as she was in trouble. Zi Yuan's heart trembled. She quickly changed the topic and asked Ding Nan, Ding Nan, I haven't seen you for a while. I didn't expect you to have reached the Zhuji phase. Congratulations. Ding Nan looked at her strangely and said coldly, Thank you. Zi Yuan asked again, Have you seen Li Yundong? When Ding Nan heard the name Li Yundong, her heart trembled slightly. She shook her head and said no. Seeing that Ding Nan didn't seem to be lying, Zi Yuan suddenly had many questions in her heart, but she asked again, Have you seen Su Chan and Zhou Qin? As soon as Ding Nan heard the name Zhou Qin, she sneered and gritted her teeth. Zhou Qin? No, if you see her, you must tell me where she is. I want to have a good time with her. Zi Yuan frowned slightly and thought to herself, Strange, where did they go? Lin Xueqing clearly asked Li Yundong to go to Pine Valley Cottage to find Wan Zhenyuan. Seeing that Zi Yuan was silent, Zhong Qingsong said, Zhenren Zi Yuan, if there's nothing else, please forgive me for not entertaining you. Seeing that he had asked her to leave, Zi Yuan had no choice but to say helplessly, Abbess Zhong, if you see Li Yundong or Su Chan, you must tell me where they are. Zhong Qingsong smiled slightly and said, Okay. Zi Yuan bowed slightly to him, looked around unwillingly, and soon turned into a beam of blue light and flew away. Zhang Yuan, who was standing to one side, saw that Zhong Qingsong and Lin Xueqing both breathed a sigh of relief when they saw Zi Yuan leave. He suddenly became suspicious, but he had always been shrewd, so his face remained calm. He smiled and said goodbye to Zhong Qingsong, then took Ding Nan all the way down the mountain. When the two of them went down the mountain, Ding Nan said to Zhang Yuan unwillingly, "Master, did we come all the way in vain? Did we return empty-handed?" Zhang Yuan lowered his head and pondered all the way, as if he was thinking about something. He raised his hand and motioned for Ding Nan not to speak. Zhang Yuan stood on the mountain road and lowered his head to ponder for a while. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked up at the sky. Although the sky was clear, it was densely covered with clouds, especially in the direction of Tiandu Peak. The clouds were dense with colorful clouds, like dragons and tigers, and the top of Tiandu Peak was even more colorful. Zhang Yuan's heart skipped a beat, as if he had thought of something. His eyes suddenly lit up. He slapped his thigh and said loudly, "I know." Ding Nan was shocked by Zhang Yuan's shout and quickly asked, "Master, what do you know?" Zhang Yuan laughed out loud, pointed in the direction of Tiandu Peak, and said proudly, "Brother Zhong, I treated you with sincerity, but you fooled me like this. Do you think I can't guess it if you hide it from me?" Ding Nan was intrigued by Zhang Yuan's words and asked, "Master, what's the matter?" Zhang Yuan laughed and pointed to the top of Tiandu Peak, saying, "My good disciple, look. Since ancient times, if an alchemist wanted to refine elixirs of immortality, he must find a peak with magnificent feng shui. Moreover, wherever he refined elixirs, there would definitely be abnormalities. Back then, Zhang Daoling, the founder of the Xueqi school, was refining elixirs on Mount Longhu. At that time, the sky was densely covered with colorful clouds, and the clouds were like dragons and tigers fighting. Look, isn't this scene very similar to when Zhang Tianshi was refining elixirs?" Ding Nan glanced over and couldn't help nodding. However, she had been cultivating for some time and had completed the Xueqi phase. She was no longer an ignorant person who knew nothing about cultivation like before. She said curiously, "But when cultivators refine elixirs and build the Xueqi phase, there will also be such abnormalities." Zhang Yuan clapped his hands and said, "You're right. But think about what Zhong Qingsong, Lin Xueqi, and Zi Yuan said before. People like Zhong Qingsong usually hoard a large number of medicinal materials in their hands, so that they can refine elixirs themselves. But why were they suddenly swept away? Humph, someone must be refining a peerless elixir of immortality, so they need to consume a huge amount of medicinal materials. This is why all the medicinal materials in his hands have been taken away." Zhang Yuan's eyes flickered and he said, "Moreover, Lin Xueqi and Zhong Qingsong were evasive in their words before. It's obvious that they're hiding something. They obviously met Li Yunyang and Wan Zhenyuan, but they said they didn't. This means that they're hiding their whereabouts. But why did they have to hide the whereabouts of these two people? What is it that cannot be told to others?" Zhang Yuan's face showed a cunning and confident smile. He pointed to Tiandu Peak and said with certainty, "These two people must be refining the peerless elixir of immortality there. If my guess is right, it must be the Dun Jindan." Ding Nan was shocked. "The Dun Jindan?" Zhang Yuan laughed and said, "Yes, it's very likely that it's this elixir of immortality." There was a strong sense of greed in Ding Nan's eyes. She knew that after Zhou Qin had eaten the Renyuan Jindan, she had become so strong that she didn't even dare to look at her directly. If she could eat the Dun Jindan, what would happen? Ding Nan instigated, "Master, should we?" Zhang Yuan didn't wait for her to finish speaking. He snorted and laughed. "Yes, of course we have to rob it. How can we let such a peerless elixir of immortality slip away from under our noses?" Ding Nan was overjoyed, but she soon frowned and said, "But, with just the two of us." Zhang Yuan sneered and said, "Don't worry. When I spread the news, cultivators from all over the world will definitely flock here. At that time, Tiandu Peak will definitely be very lively." Ding Nan's eyes lit up. "Then we can fish in troubled waters?" Zhang Yuan and Ding Nan looked at each other and laughed at the same time. This was the second night watch after yesterday. Today, the 2 night watch periods would be as usual. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.